This is a carefully curated compilation of dark Half-Life lore I have created over the past few years. No intros, no outros, just lore. Enjoy and good night. In this video, we explore Valve's most tragic and brutally mutilated humans, the Stalkers from the Half-Life 2 beta. As the development of Half-Life 2 made way, Ted Bachman, a designer at Valve, was inspired to make an enemy that would scare the players and add more of a horror element to the game. He was inspired by a black version of the Half-Life skeleton player model, horror-esque, but it needed attributes to bring out that Half-Life element he wanted. The developer who had originally made the skeletal model suggested that this entity could possibly hide in the shadows and leap out at the player when they got close. With this brief visual and horror element, Ted and Valve had something to develop. From here, Valve expanded on their idea of this enemy and turned it into more of an emotional choice on how to deal with them. They worked on the Stalkers and made them crouch down in the dark and follow the players around, which is where their name came from, Stalkers. When the player either turned a corner or turned around, they would then be surprised by the creature. The emotional aspect of this was what the creatures were and how they became this way. In the lore behind these, as we know, the Combine Empire jumped from universe to universe and sought out any sentient species they could to turn them into biological weapons in their multi-universal army. A part of this process was the analysis and brutal mutilation of the species so that they could be turned into, I guess, better and more efficient soldiers. The Combine adapted humanity in various ways. The most common was through the Civil Protection, a sort of human police force used by the Combine to keep the rest of humanity in line. This was a voluntary position, and with it, so were the biological modifications that came with each rank in the Civil Protection. The Stalker process was involuntary and reserved for Resistance members and those generally deemed enemies to the Combine. After capture, the Resistance members were taken to a Combine stronghold. The most commonly known was Nova Prospect, but there may have been others across the wasteland. After arrival, these poor humans were restrained, muzzled, and collared with some sort of barbaric metal. This was also one of the first design choices for the Stalker, as seen here in this concept art, still recognizable as human and clearly in a lot of pain. This is where it gets brutal. These captured humans were resistant in nature as they openly fought against a much stronger force. To counter this, the Combine implemented methods to break them down to make this transformation smoother, almost like a product on a production line at a factory. During this process, the prisoners' hands were severed to reduce the risk of an attempt to escape. Although their hands were gone, they could still run, so the Combine moved on to the next stage. This physical transformation reduced the number of Resistance members, but they needed to actually make these creations useful and productive in their army and workforce. To do this, they began the process of mental conditioning and continued it throughout the physical transformation so that they would be compliant and serve their keepers as slave laborers. The Keeper title was given to the owner or handler of the Stalker. With their mental conditioning underway, the humans were then hobbled to stop them from running, and this would have had a huge psychological effect on the subject. There was no way of escape. This was now an unavoidable fate. Eventually, their lower legs were removed entirely. Having analysed the human body and learned the bare minimum of what it needed to actually function, the Combine took out all of the Stalker's unnecessary organs and then put them on a saline solution to keep the body running. This procedure was essentially performed to make them easier to maintain. This saline solution, in turn, led their bodies to deteriorate to the point where they turned into a mere skeletal frame with a layer of yellow skin. This was almost in line with Ted Bachman's view of what he wanted the Stalkers to look like. At this point, the mental conditioning, if successful, would have removed the last sense of humanity in these poor humans. Essentially, they had become mindless husks conditioned to follow only the orders of the Combine. Towards the end of this barbaric mutilation, and now ready to serve the Combine, braces were fixed to the stumps of where their lower legs had once been to allow them to walk again. This was likely extremely painful, but at this point, for their sake, hopefully their mental conditioning had somehow allowed them to ignore pain. For ease of control and handling by their keepers, the Combine placed a girder on their heads with 5 holes in front of each eye for them to see. They were also able to use their muzzles to lap up fluids like an animal. These human resistance members had turned into something less than human, a fate worse than death. Unfortunately, their plight was not over yet. Under the control of the Combine, these creatures were sent out into the wasteland with orders from their keepers. This is where their stalking element came in. They would creep around in the shadows, stalk, and then lunge at those that opposed the Combine. As the player, we would have encountered these frequently. In Ted Bachman's words, "When you face them, they are these crazed half-human things that you cannot help but almost pity. I was hoping to put enough humanity into the things that it wasn't just a scary monster. Instead, it was something that presented a moral dilemma every time you had to deal with it, which I think is a more interesting problem. It is more horrific to have to deal with an insane hostage than something that just wants to eat your brains." Although it is not noted on the concept art or development documents I could find, these Stalkers also had the ability to emit powerful beams of energy from their eyes. From this concept art, we can also see that the Combine attached equipment and weaponry to their arms so that they could fulfill their orders. We all know of the Half-Life 2 leak. It portrayed a vastly different version of the game we eventually received. The locations and creatures had a more dystopian and darker feel. For the most part, I prefer the retail version of Half-Life, but there were elements that I feel we missed out on, one of which was the Cremator. I wish we had received that. At least we had a sort of Easter egg with its head in a jar in Eli's lab. Anyway, in this leak, the Stalkers were to be encountered throughout most of the game, found frequently in the Cut Air Exchange level and on the Borealis, which in the beta was not this mysterious ship built by Aperture Science that had immense technology on it. It was just a normal ship that transported goods. One of these goods were the Stalkers, which was stored in hanging cages. They also helped Elena Mossman in the operation of her secret resistance base, Kraken Base. Elena Mossman was the original version of Judith Mossman. From what I can tell, they had a similar storyline. For enemies so well designed and apparently implemented pretty well into the game, what happened to them? Although Valve had a brilliant vision for the Stalkers, they found that these creatures were not fun to work with. Valve did create various gameplay puzzles for the players to solve using them. An example is using the Stalkers to cut through sheets of metal with their laser beams, but even these were considered boring tasks to perform. Valve determined that the majority of the sequences that involved the Stalkers appeared scripted and stagey, so unfortunately, they were taken out of the game, redesigned and reintroduced to have a different role in the story of Half-Life. With the release of Half-Life 2 after the leak, players obviously noted the huge difference between the games. Half-Life 2 was still a dark game, but it was a lighter tone than the beta. We also had to wait until the end of Half-Life 2 and later in Half-Life 2 Episode 1 to discover what happened to the Stalkers. They follow a similar lore, but they have a huge visual difference. Looking at these side by side, the Stalkers in the retail version, although terrible, are pretty tame in comparison to the beta. The beta skin is literally stitched together to keep it on. Personally, the worst part about the beta Stalker is the belt around their spine. It is incredibly uncomfortable to look at. The retail version is more fleshed out. They have had a similar transformation in terms of losing their hands, lower legs, organs, reproductive system, and so on. But just look at the difference in hip bones. In the beta, we can see the bone. It's disgusting to look at. They also had a completely different function in the game. Instead of stalking the player, these Stalkers are shown to operate combine machinery in the Citadel to keep it running. They are just drones that operate machinery, and they are extremely passive. Unless the player interacts with them, they will ignore you and just get on with their tasks, which begs the question, why are they still called Stalkers? I would like to think that maybe the Combine used them for stalking in other parts of the world, maybe. This change in their functionality in Half-Life 2 also took away part of that emotional impact Ted wanted to portray with the creatures. Sure, the retail version of the Stalkers are still tragic, but as the player, we could just ignore them and move on without interaction. But in the beta, we were preyed upon by them and had to make that choice to put them out of their misery, completely aware of what they had once been. I named my first Stalker lore video A Fate Worse Than Death, and these still carry that name. But the beta Stalkers are something else, a truly terrifying existence. I understand why Valve changed the function of the Stalkers in terms of puzzle mechanics, but I still wish they had kept their original design. It's haunting and adds a more terrifying feel to the Half-Life universe. I also wish that they had kept that stalking element. They would have been great to encounter in Ravenholm, the canals of City 17, and maybe even in the halls of Nova Prospect as you work your way through the prison. Out of all of the creatures and changes Valve made from the beta, this is one I would have loved to have seen in the retail game. In this video, we explore another collection of terrible fates in the Half-Life universe. Many awful things happened to the population of Earth during the course of the Half-Life series, but we all have our own subjective opinions about what makes one experience worse than another, based on several psychological and physical factors. This is my interpretation and viewpoint of the worst possible things that could happen to someone, in order of severity. We begin with something fairly horrific but glossed over frequently in the timeline. Following the breakthrough of teleportation technology and the discovery of the border world of Xen, the Black Mesa Research Facility wanted to explore this dimension. To do this, a survey team was established in order to study the environment, the flora and fauna. This series of floating islands was nothing like Earth and abided by its own rules. The first expedition of Xen would have consisted of a group of specially selected scientists whose job it was to report anything they found back to Black Mesa, but even they could not have prepared for what they found. Every step offered the opportunity of a unique death, as the humans would have encountered the extremely hostile wildlife and plant life that had also found their way to Xen as the border world had crossed paths with their worlds. The bodies of the first expedition soon littered the landscape, each claimed by Xen in its own way. Some were never found at all. Deep in the caves, surveyors setting up their equipment drew the attention of barnacles lurking above. Before they could react, a slimy, sticky tongue had already coiled around them, hauling them upwards towards a gaping mouth waiting to devour them alive. Headcrabs wandered away from their gonarch and discovered that humans were the perfect hosts to merge with. Nearby, strange trees that might have offered valuable insight into how plant life grew on Zen lashed out at anyone who ventured too close. From the darkest pits, tentacles emerged to drag the unwary down into the depths. Ichthyosaurs, houndeyes, vortigauns, and countless other creatures that called Zen home attacked anything unfamiliar on sight. To them, the intruders were an unwelcome presence in their territory. In my opinion, the worst way to die was introduced in the Black Mesa remake, the underwater barnacle. It latched onto its prey as they swam, dragged them down, and devoured them alive as they drowned. The true horror was that the first expedition had no idea what awaited them on the floating islands of Zen. The data they gathered was indeed valuable, but not to them. Black Mesa used their findings only to ensure that the next group sent through would avoid meeting the same fate. For all we know, some members of the first human expedition to Zen might have survived, stranded there and forced to adapt to the alien world, cut off and isolated from everything they once knew. We may never know the full story of the first expedition of Zen, but whatever happened, it must have been terrifying. Few deaths are worse than being eaten alive, yet I believe psychological torment is every bit as horrific. Following the Combine invasion, the new regime imposed a system that demanded absolute obedience and punished those who defied severely. Humans were transported like cattle to cities governed and monitored by the Combine. Within this system, some were recruited into the Civil Protection, serving as enforcers of the regime's rules against their own kind. The terrible fate is that of the life of a regular citizen, a life of constant paranoia and fear. Those who volunteered as members of the Civil Protection participated behind a mask of anonymity. A resident of an apartment block never knew if their friends or neighbors were truly aligned with the Combine agenda or had thoughts of resistance. The system established by the Combine offered secret rewards to those who provided information about anyone daring to challenge the regime. Random raids targeted those suspected of resistance activity, and anyone found to possess intelligence or ties to hidden resistance groups were interrogated, or worse, transformed into a stalker. In a society where food, water, and even social interaction were tightly controlled and offered only as rewards for compliance, a single wrong word could bring suffering, while betraying others offered a brief release from constant tension. Prolonged stress has a heavy toll on the body, bringing headaches, exhaustion, feverish sweats, and a growing weakness to disease, just to name a few. The life of a citizen in a Combine-controlled city was one of constant overthinking, internal editing, and a pure lack of trust. One wrong glance, one wrong word, or one wrong step could lead to a beating, detainment, or a one-way trip to Nova Prospect. An existence of complete helplessness and fear. Through their exploration of the multiverse, the Combine encountered many species that they conquered, captured, and brutally adapted into living weapons and tools for their ever-growing army. When the Combine Empire discovered the Vortigaunt homeworld, however, the species narrowly escaped through a rift into the border world of Zen. The Vortigaunt were unlike any species the Combine had encountered before, and sometime later, after the Resonance Cascade and the invasion of Earth, the two crossed paths once again. The Vortigaunts had a natural connection to something they called the Vortessence, a tapestry of vortal threads woven through space and time. They could harness it to unleash deadly energy, teleport, manipulate time, and even see into the future. The Combine saw the potential of this connection and wanted to integrate the energy of the Vortessence into their army, but it could only be accessed by the Vortigaunt. Having conquered Earth, they captured every Vortigaunt they discovered and even distributed propaganda to urge the scared population to report the Vort. Through their nightmarish experimentation on the biology of the captured Vortigaunts, the Combine could not find a way to reverse engineer a technical connection to the Vortessence with adaptive machinery. So, they created devices to imprison the Vortigaunts to turn them into living batteries instead. Scattered throughout the quarantine zone, pods were placed containing restrained Vortigaunts, kept alive in darkness while the machinery around them drained the Vortessence that flowed through their bodies. All they could do was reach out through the veil, communicating with others of their kind through a psychic network. Their physical forms trapped in confinement as their essence was forcibly drained. This fate mirrors some of the atrocities of the Strogg in Quake in a sense, but I will admit, Quake was so much worse. The thought of being detained in such an enclosed space and used to power machinery is such an uncomfortable thought. While alone in person, at least they still had a connection to the others who were trapped, a fate of being conscious but truly powerless. The tale of Gary the Vortigaunt is just sad. I would say his story is similar to Doug Ratman of Portal. Doug lost his connection to reality, Gary lost his connection to everyone. Just like the rest of his kind, Gary escaped the Nylanth rule after the Resonance Cascade, only to be captured by the Combine upon reaching Earth. He was among the unfortunate Vortigaunts chosen for experimentation, as the Combine sought to understand how his species accessed the Vortessence. Gary was branded, restrained, and examined in depth as the Combine cut open his head to see how the receptors that accessed the Vortessence functioned, during which he suffered a brain injury, and then everything went quiet. The vortal threads of the Vortessence were loud, a constant hum that connected every Vortigaunt together across space and time, but his injury silenced it. That one cruel wound severed him from the fabric, from the collective consciousness that bound his kind as one. For the first time in his existence, he was truly alone. Gary eventually escaped captivity and made a home for himself in the abandoned, hostile quarantine zone of City 17. Though his connection to the Vortessence had been severed, faint traces of it still lingered. He held on to memories of his homeworld, of Zen, of his people, and what was yet to come. With these fading fragments, Gary painted a mural before they slipped away, of friends, foes, and prepared to live out the rest of his days in isolation as his perception of the past, present, and future blended into one. The Vortigaunts were a highly social species, but without the ability to communicate with his kin or peer into the Vortessence, Gary had lost everything. While those used as living batteries were imprisoned physically, they still shared a connection with the others of their kind. Gary suffered the opposite fate, freedom without connection. The Combine had truly broken him. Psychological torment and isolation linger far longer than physical pain. There is something fairly uniquely horrifying about being trapped with your own thoughts and fears with no one left to bring you back to reality. The name Ravenholm is synonymous with terror. It stands as the creepiest chapter in Half-Life 2, but have you ever stopped to think about what the Resistance members and refugees went through during its fall? As Gordon Freeman, we only witnessed the aftermath. This mining town was once full of refugees and Resistance members who had escaped the oppressive regime of City 17. To get there, they would have traversed the Underground Railroad, a journey that not everyone survived. Anyway, as this town filled up, they each found their role and purpose in the Resistance. Black Mesa East was home to the leader of the Resistance, Dr. Eli Vance, and through a secret underground tunnel, refugees traveled between Ravenholm and the base. These people would have felt safe here, hidden away from the constant surveillance of the Combine, with their own freedom to say and do what they wanted following years of hardship. But this paradise did not last. At one point, the Combine became aware of the existence of Ravenholm and that it was home to a resistance group. With their focus on efficiency, the Combine did not send in units to wipe out those who defied their rule. They offered something far worse. It would have been a day like any other in Ravenholm, and then the shells fell. From them came waves of headcrabs of different varieties, normal, poison, and fast, whose natural instinct was to latch onto the heads of the panicked human population around them. The Resistance members would have defended who they could with their weaponry, but the refugees had no combat experience and simply became prey to the swarm. As every second passed, Ravenholm became more and more dangerous as the victims of the headcrabs bonded with their parasites and became zombies. Ravenholm was the perfect location for a resistance town because it was secluded and located next to a secret base, but this seclusion was a double-edged sword. When the survivors reached the tunnel that led to Black Mesa East, they found it sealed. Their leader believed the Combine had detected only the existence of Ravenholm, not Black Mesa East. In the chaos, he made a very difficult decision: to seal the tunnel and sacrifice the lives of those in Ravenholm so that his base and the Resistance could continue their work. As for the people in Ravenholm, they were slaughtered and overtaken one by one, having been sacrificed by the leader of the course that was meant to free them. Only one survivor is known of this tragic event, Father Gregory, and while he was able to defend himself well, he stayed in the town to free the people he had once seen as his congregation from the parasites that tortured them. This is a fate of betrayal, abandonment, and ultimately eternal torment from the headcrabs that kept their victim hosts alive. These humans could not control their own actions. All they could do was stand around in absolute agony, subjected to cosmic, physical, existential, and psychological horror all in one. This place was meant to be their sanctuary, but it became their tomb. It was well known that the regions beyond the Combine city walls had become an extremely hostile wasteland. But what was actually out there? The oceans had turned into breeding grounds for leeches, headcrabs roamed the land, and the most territorial and devastating of all were the antlions. This highly intelligent species had been pulled to Earth by the portal storms triggered by the Resonance Cascade. Without a way back to Zen, they made Earth their home. With a strong hierarchy and different castes, over time, each antlion played their role in the formation of nests deep underground. Complex, labyrinthine tunnels home to grubs, workers, guards, guardians, and soldiers. The tunnels themselves were cramped, sticky, twisted, and the deeper they went, the darker they got and the more protective the antlions became. Only the Vortigauns are known to have entered these nests willingly in search of antline larvae, something that enhanced their connection to the Vortessence. But what about those who did not go willingly? We have explored the idea of becoming a living battery, being completely disconnected from an entire network and living in isolation. But this fate makes me so uncomfortable to think about. Antline's soldiers were predominantly responsible for feeding their nest, and to do this, they hid just underground and waited for the vibrations of someone above. When they detected prey, they broke through the ground and killed what had dared to enter their territory. The majority of their targets would have died quickly and been brought back to the nests to feed, but what about those who did not die? This terrible fate is that of one of those. They would have regained consciousness encased in silk, unable to move in the claustrophobic tunnels of a colony, stored away in preparation to be eaten. The worst part, the grubs of a colony were tiny, and if their meal was still alive, the person would have felt small chunks being ripped from them, piece by piece. All the while, the blood, bones, and remains of other victims stuck to the ground around them, and they would be one of them. I had always thought that being eaten by a barnacle was the worst way to go, but that would have been so much faster than this. The final fate in this collection is rooted in a merge of Half-Life 2 Episode 3, Epistle 3 and Breengrub. Now, Episode 3 was cancelled, but we do have concept art and a little information about what it would have entailed, while Epistle 3 and Breengrub were sort of fan creations of Mark Laidlaw, the writer for the series. The story is that while Dr. Wallace Breen met his demise after his fall from the top of the Citadel in City 17, his story was not over in a sense. Epistle 3 and Breengrub tell us that when the Combine encountered bright minds on the worlds they conquered, they had technology that allowed them to make copies of a person's state at that moment. This meant all of their memories, personality, and basically who they were up until that moment. Following the 7-hour war, Breen agreed to have his mind backed up frequently to the Combine system. This meant that when he was alive, different versions of him, snapshots, were stored away from different points in his life, post-Combine. The Breengrub Twitter account was one of these older snapshots imprinted onto a Shu'ulathoi, a giant slug. This snapshot of Breen was confused about what had happened and was completely unaware of the death of his original. His confusion turned to panic and fear of being watched and monitored. He was helpful at first and relayed information about the original species of the Combine Advisor, how the Combine grew them and imprinted minds on them, but these messages soon turned into Combine propaganda after they realized he was giving away information. This is clearly not canon, but an interesting view into the direction of Episode 3. Anyway, we know that Breengrub would have been in Episode 3 because of this concept art. If it were to be anything like Epistle 3, Gordon would have met a broken Wallace Breen in the mind of a slug, nervous and terrified of everything. He knew Gordon had been responsible for the death of his original, and although he had been loyal to the Combine, he had become their prisoner in this form. The horror of this fate is that Breen had lost all autonomy, power, and was reduced to a slug under the control of the Combine, his only value being his bright mind. You can see the pain and grotesque form he had become in this concept art. Body horror, along with isolation, is just brutal, and desperate to escape this tragic existence, Breen asked Freeman to put an end to his life, to be put at rest. Wallace Breen was responsible for so many abhorrent actions in the Half-Life series. This version may not have even been aware of a ton of them, but did he deserve this? Here we explore in the lore and story behind the Cremators in the Half-Life 2 beta. Shortly after the Black Mesa incident, the vast population of planet Earth discovered that life existed on other worlds. However, this life was not kind. It was hostile and wanted to claim the planet for themselves. As the world's armies fought against the Xenian flora and fauna that had travelled to Earth by portal storms, humanity grew weaker and weaker as they fought them off. The situation became dire when the Combine discovered the planet. They had a more coordinated attack and used their resources to weaken Earth's armies further. For the next 7 hours, the population of Earth was decimated. That was until a deal was made with this dominating force. Humanity offered their submission in return for their lives. The Combine had conquered many species at this point in their quest to dominate the multiverse, but this planet was not as simple as they had once thought. The majority of humanity did fall into their new, submissive roles and followed orders, but the Xenian creatures that had arrived just before their war became an ongoing problem that was not too easy to solve. The Xenian infestation spread across the whole of the planet, and it even managed to get into parts of the Combine-controlled strongholds they had developed to hold their newly captured species. Headcrabs, barnacles, and fungi spread quickly. This made these areas extremely dangerous, not only for the humans, but also for the Combine workers. With this growing problem, the Combine had to create something that would help them with the Xenian problem, as well as a rising resistance. Over the years, the Combine formed factories across their cities. In these, they developed items to keep the humans in line and increase their hold over the planet. The worst part about this was that they forced children to work inside of them. In one of these factories, the children worked on a Combine force known as the Cremator. The details of the creation of this creature still is kept mostly secret by the Combine. However, what is known is that the children in the Cremator factories were in charge of the formation of their heads. Upon completion, this orb was attached to a body. It is unknown whether the Cremator was yet another one of the Combine's transhuman accomplishments, as their body was hidden by a long coat. But just like the Stalker, it did have a humanoid appearance and was heard breathing heavily. This meant that it was somewhat still of an organic nature, as the creatures did have long human arms and hands, although these only consisted of 4 fingers. The Resistance theorized that these were human once, just brutally adapted, and their original heads were either improved by the children in the factories, or replaced entirely to combine the human part with Combine technology. In their towering presence, the most notable feature of the Cremator was their gun, the Immolator. This was designed to connect to a sphere through a hose. This sphere appeared to have been surgically placed inside the body of the creature, and from this receptacle, the Cremators used the acidic substance inside to power their weapon to complete its tasks across the city. The Cremators were an intimidating force across the cities and wasteland, and as the years passed, they became an essential part in keeping life running almost smoothly on a Combine-controlled Earth. But what did they do exactly? As the citizens wandered the dark streets, they avoided the Cremators on their journey. They were easy to spot and hear as their heavy breathing gave their presence away almost immediately. They had important tasks to do, ordered by the Combine, and no one would get in their way. The most important task by far was dealing with the ongoing Xenian infestation, and they were built perfectly to deal with this. Upon arrival in these infested regions, their almost surgical clothing kept them safe from additional transmission of Xenian matter. With their immolators, almost like a human flamethrower, they spread an acidic wave of plasma at anything that looked even remotely Xenian. This ammunition had been designed specifically to break down and destroy organic matter upon impact. This made their jobs fairly easy to complete, unless the region had been completely overridden by Xenian flora, in which it was just a time issue. The best part of this substance was that it left no trace of what was once there, and therefore completely reduced the risk of the infestation spreading further. This allowed new areas of the cities to be opened up to be developed for additional Combine activities. To keep new infestations out of Combine-controlled regions altogether, Cremators were stationed within train depots. Razor trains and regular transportation trains travelled across the wasteland from city to city, transporting goods and people. The wasteland was a barren, bleak desert as a result of the Combine's adaptation of the planet. However, Xenian creatures had also made it their home. There was a chance that any piece of this infestation could attach itself to the trains, so as they arrived in the depots, the Cremators were ordered to cleanse them with their immobilizers. Nothing organic would survive this. Over the years of Combine occupation, the alien force noticed that there was more and more resistance activities in the city. For the most part, their propaganda scattered across the wasteland kept the majority of humanity in fear and in line, but there were others who wanted the Combine gone. As time passed, the Resistance formed bases and attacked Combine strongholds in an attempt to attain technology and resources for their fight against the aliens. On many occasions, the Combine took them out and left their bodies on the streets. This became yet another job for the Cremators to deal with. They were essentially the equivalent of a Combine janitor. With their immobilizers, they fired at these once brave humans with their green energy plasma until there was nothing left. No trace that a fight had even taken place. The Cremators were workers for the Combine and focused only on their tasks. However, this did not stop the Resistance from attacking them, and just like other Combine entities, they too could die. If successful, the Resistance then had access to their weapons, a tool designed to cleanse the streets, but when used as a weapon to take on Combine forces, it was deadly. Other members of the Resistance were also noted to take the heads of the Cremators to use them as objects to throw in battle. Regardless, the creation of the Cremators is one of the Combine's best kept secrets. As far as we know, they could have once been human, adapted into janitors to clean up the mess of the Black Mesa incident. The creation of the Cremators is shrouded in mystery. They were essential in keeping the Xenian infestation from spreading into the safe regions of the wasteland that the Combine had created to hold humanity. They are also one of the many scrapped ideas from the Half-Life 2 beta that would still fit into the retail game perfectly. So maybe they were out there, cleaning the streets just out of view of the Resistance and the citizens. The Combine were capable of so much, and we likely only saw a fraction of what they had created in their short time on Earth. Maybe one day we will see the Cremators return. Most of the Half-Life fandom know of the Cremator. I bet a lot of you saw this in Eli's lab and wondered what the hell it was. This, my friends, is the head of a cremator being studied by Dr. Vance. Now, this opens up a few questions. Instantly, it could simply just be an Easter egg they have brought over from the beta that some fans may recognize. The heads are also shown in Raising the Bar, so for the fans that did more than just play the retail game, they would at least recognize it. My favourite idea, and it makes sense, is that if Eli had somehow managed to get the head of a cremator, then surely cremators do or did exist in City 17 at one point. It should also be noted that Eli does comment on the head, and he says, "We're not sure what that does." Alex brings in the strangest things, which means that the Resistance may not be aware that they actually exist. Although they were never seen in City 17 during Gordon Freeman's time, they could have still been in different cities or parts of the cities. It's nice to think that they could actually be out there in a weird way. Similar to the Houndai, they were not shown in Half-Life 2, but they were in the wasteland somewhere. The developers were very attached to the Cremator, and I understand why. A towering figure that destroys biological matter. It's kind of haunting to think about. A quick spoiler for Half-Life Alyx, I'll put a timestamp here for when I have finished talking about it. 20 years after the release of Half-Life 2, we have concept art for potential Cremators in Half-Life Alyx, which was released in 2020. Valve wanted to implement something they had missed out on in Half-Life 2, and the Cremators in Alyx were going to be the people that cleaned up those Xenian-infested areas in the quarantine zones. I would have loved these fights, but it just didn't work, and they were replaced with the hazmat suit workers. The positive of this is that we got Jeff, as he was a hazmat worker that got infected. The Cremators are the best Half-Life creatures or person that was never implemented into the game. It really is a shame because they still do fit into the world perfectly. There would have been so many bodies after the 7-hour war and even resistance battles between the Combine and the Brave of humanity. It just makes sense that the Cremators would have cleaned up the streets after these events. I think the most interesting part about the Cremators may not even be about the creatures themselves. We have no idea if they were alien or human. It would make the most sense if they were human adapted by Combine technology, but Valve have never really stated what they were. Everyone that knows of the beta mentioned that it was much darker than the retail version. It is a meme at this point, but in one of the beta maps, we would have visited or just passed by a Cremator factory and watched the child workers creating the heads for them. They are extremely buggy here, but it is great to see this in action. This is absolutely something I feel like we missed out on in the retail game, as the children just did not exist as a result of the suppression field. In the beta, they were literally watched over by an armed guard to complete their tasks. It just adds another dimension to the cruelty of the Combine and their treatment of anyone really. I would love to actually get a full version of the beta story as an official launch, but I doubt that Valve would go for that. As I mentioned in the last beta video, which was on the console, Half-Life 2 Raising the Bar shows just how much content was scrapped from the retail game, and there was so much in there that would have been perfect. Luckily, we have an amazing modding community that have brought a lot of these to life. There is still a lot of Half-Life beta content to talk about. I've been talking about Half-Life for over a year now, and there are still a ton of topics to cover, cut and uncut. In this video, we explore the lore and story behind the Overwatch Elite. After the dust settled from the 7-hour war, Earth's population had to adapt to a new normal. They were rounded up, sent to settlements, and monitored constantly for any signs of rebellion or resistance. One of these settlements, City 17, was developed over in Eastern Europe in what the Combine called Sector 17 of Earth. Over the years of Combine occupation, many practices were put in place to ensure compliance. The water was drugged to make the humans forget why they hated the Combine. Food was restricted and distributed in rations to enforce control, and housing was assigned so that Earth's benefactors knew exactly where each citizen was. Everything was monitored, everything was controlled. These factors pushed the citizens into one of three paths. The first, a life of submission. In a world in which food, water, and safety was offered only through compliance, and injury and death was promised through resistance, the large chunk of the population bowed down to the Combine and obeyed every command. The second, a life of resistance. Although the Combine had broken down humanity well, there were still those who wanted to fight, and they did. A small group was established, and over time, they developed secret labs, raided Combine strongholds for weapons and information, and sparked a symbol of hope for a possible future without Combine occupation. The third was to become a part of the Overwatch, the Combine's military force. To collaborate was pushed to the masses as something good, and it came with lucrative rewards and benefits, additional rations, better food, and purpose in a new world order. This path was chosen by those who were truly desperate, wanted to keep their friends and family safe, and most interestingly, those who believed in the Combine's regime and wanted to play their parts. Run by the Overwatch AI, the human arm of the Combine army was structured in a way to not only get humanity to govern themselves following their regime, but to spread mistrust and paranoia of neighbors and friends. Anyone could be a part of the Overwatch, and there were rewards for turning in those who spoke or acted against the regime. Now, the Overwatch had several tiers, and as the units rose through the ranks, additional privileges, responsibilities, and assignments were offered. However, each promotion came with change. Through their experiments on the human body, the Combine believed they had perfected the process of turning us into weapons using extensive biological and mental augmentation, just as they had with the Strider and Gunship. At the entry level, a completely unchanged Metrocop in the civil protection, and at the top, a drastically modified Overwatch Elite soldier, something that resembled a human on the outside, but underneath the armor was something so much darker. The population of City 17 was aware to a degree of what it meant to become a part of the Overwatch. A Metrocop was just a normal human. They clocked in for their shift, patrolled the streets in local regions, beat down those who disobeyed, raided suspected resistance members, questioned them, and then took off their uniforms at the end of the day. But for those who wanted more, those who wanted to help the Combine, well, there were options available. Nova Prospect was once a human prison, and just like everything they touched, it was enhanced into something better. A place to store those who worked against them, and most notably, a place of transformation. Only those dedicated to the Combine's cause willingly went to Nova Prospect. As for those who did not, well, they went through a darker transformation, a punishment for their rebellion. The willing transition from Metrocop to Overwatch Soldier was pretty extensive. This came in two stages, mental and physical. From what the Vortigaunt and Resistance were able to share during the operation, the throat was opened up and a vocoder was implanted to improve their communication through a radio in their helmet with other units. Their lungs were enhanced to ensure longevity, resilience, and durability. This meant that they could run for much longer and hold their breath for extended periods of time during an assignment. Their abdomens were extensively altered with a plated material that offered protection against anything that were able to make it past their armor. In a similar manner to the Stalker, a feeding hole was grafted to ensure they required minimum upkeep and downtime. From other art, it appears that augmentations and devices were also installed into the brain itself that connected directly to their masks. From these, it appears that the mask was never intended to be removed after it had been installed, and as a result, each Overwatch soldier became identical, just like the Stalkers, Gunship, and Dropships, another number in the Combine army. Through the process of mental reprogramming, their memories were adapted, emotions reduced, and in their place, Overwatch codes and combat techniques were in a way uploaded. This meant that each unit was at the same level of practice when on a mission, and they all acted the same way. The Overwatch soldiers were perfectly crafted and enhanced by the Combine. Each variation of Combine soldier went through their own changes to be the best they could be for the task they were assigned for. Each had their own weapons, equipment, and orders to follow in different locations across the wasteland. On one occasion, a resistance fighter managed to take out a Combine grunt, and after the mask came off, they saw just how extensive the surgery was. Their eyes and ears had been removed, and in their place, wires connected directly to visual and audio outputs in the mask. In a way, their senses had been heightened, but it came at the cost of their humanity. It was also clear that, at least after the Metrocop rank, the uniforms became permanent. This was a willing decision, a true believer in the Combine. For those who truly believed in the Combine's agenda and wanted to give in completely, they were given the opportunity to become an Overwatch Elite. They were the strongest, fastest, and most intelligent of Overwatch units, the peak of what the Combine believed a human could be. These units were as mysterious as they were deadly. The Overwatch Elite were rarely seen by the masses, and deployed only on specific assignments and locations. Marked by their single red lens and pristine white armor, these units were engineered for absolute efficiency in combat. The mask itself tells an interesting and darker story of what was hidden behind it. The grunts in the rank below had their eyes and ears removed so that their vision and hearing could be enhanced through the Combine's biological technology. With only a single, centrally placed lens, their field of vision would have been severely restricted unless their optical nerves were wired directly into the mask, providing an augmented, calculated view of the battlefield, a way for the soldier to attain perfect accuracy through a likely interface displayed from Overwatch into their very vision. Their hearing would have also gone through a similar process in which at the sides of their mask were two audio domes. These units possessed enhanced sight and hearing. Their extensive modifications granted them heightened reflexes, reinforced durability, and inbuilt plating to protect their vital organs. Even if they were injured, they would not have felt it. As for their armor, it was heavy plated, and their jackboots ensured their feet and legs were also safe. This armor presented a human silhouette, but beneath it lay a body scarred, twisted, and irreversibly altered with wires. A complete mutilation of a human to be enhanced in the eyes of the Combine. And still, these units had agreed to this, along with a complete mental reprogramming to be completely subservient to their benefactors. At this point, they had no emotion, no empathy, no connection to humanity. The instinct to fight or flight had also been stripped away. Only obedience remained. They did what they were told. The only instruction or entity they cared about was the Overwatch AI who commanded them. Every unit in the Overwatch had an insignia to mark their place in the hierarchy, and I would say that the Elite was the most interesting. Their sector marked at the bottom of a Combine claw that had trapped a cracked human skull. A perfect emblem of the Combine's conquest, humanity captured, broken, and in this case, complicit. As with every Overwatch rank, the Elite were given specific weapons to complete their assignments. They wielded Overwatch-issued pulse rifles, a deadly fusion of human and Combine technology. The rifles fired out shells of pure energy, and with the Elite's incredible aim, their targets were easily put down. If there were a larger group of targets or an obstacle in the way, the secondary fire of the rifle was perfect. With the tap of the trigger, the rifle launched out a concentrated sphere of dark plasma, an unstoppable force that destroyed almost anything in its way. After ascending through the brutal augmentations of the hierarchy of the Overwatch to reach the Elite rank, we have to ask, what purpose did these units truly serve? While the Metrocops were seen within the cities, Overwatch soldiers in Xenian-infested regions, the Wasteland, and assault on resistant strongholds, grunts, ordinals, and suppressors in the Quarantine Zone. The Elite were given their own assignments and uses, and on occasion took command and ordered the units in the lower ranks. Only when necessary were they deployed to stop resistance activity that could risk the progress and safety of a Combine stronghold, or the future of their reign. 2 were permanently stationed outside of Dr. Wallace Breen's office, the Administrator of Earth, to ensure his safety. During the assault of Nova Prospect, Elites were sent to deal with Dr. Gordon Freeman, but they missed him by mere seconds. When the Combine discovered that a small resistance team had travelled to the Arctic North, Overwatch Elite were sent with Overwatch soldiers. Their mission was successful. They not only captured Dr. Judith Mossman, but also discovered information about a lost research vessel with possible teleportation technology on board. After the destabilization of the Citadel, several Overwatch Elites were ordered to remain at the core to guard it. The fall of the Citadel was the perfect opportunity to use the mass influx of energy to send a message to the Combine overworld and trigger the formation of a super portal. On this mission specifically, the Overwatch Elites knew that this would be their final mission. They had to guard it until the core collapsed and exploded. Even though they were the best soldiers the Combine had, they were still disposable, and they obeyed. Their conditioning had taken away their natural instinct to survive. And after the fall of the Citadel, those who remained were ordered to secure the safety and transportation of Combine advisors still in their pods. Each mission was chosen specifically for their talents and abilities. Now, the Overwatch Elite were not seen as frequently as the other Overwatch units. This may have been most likely because they were only deployed when they were needed. As this procedure was extensive and brutal, there would have also been less of this rank than the rest. It has been suggested, however, that elites were sent to other worlds to conquer them. If the changes were vast enough, their respiratory systems and reduction of the needs of food and water would have allowed them to at least function on other worlds. All the Combine had to do was adapt their masks to endure the new atmosphere. As the cycle began again, just as humanity had been terrified by the Strider and Hunter, another species would have looked upon the Combine Elite with the same fear. Just a new abhorrent creation of the Combine, a new warrior in their army. After the fall of the Citadel and the dissipation of the Super Portal, the Combine overworld was completely cut off from planet Earth. This meant that every unit in their army was alone, left to govern themselves without orders from the advisors or whatever was above their rank. The Overwatch Elite were no longer human. Their minds sought out one thing, their next order from their leaders. If the Resistance were able to somehow break down every aspect of what remained of the Combine's regime and returned Earth to a somewhat similar form it was before their arrival, what did it mean for the Transformed? Whether these biological and mental modifications are reversible is unknown. Yet, it would take someone highly skilled to neutralize an elite to even try. Aside from the Stalker, the Overwatch Elite was the most graphic and brutal transformation performed on a human. Still, they made their choice to join and upgrade, to become a cog in the Combine machine. What is for sure is that they would not rejoin humanity willingly. They had ascended. In this video, we explore how humanity was systematically broken down and shattered in an anatomy of the Combine's brutal regime. The question is, how exactly did the Combine break down humanity so effectively to the point they were fearfully compliant in action and thought? Just look at the consoling couple. The easy answer to this question is through the use of fear and force, but there is so much more to it than that. We know of the 7-Hour War, how the Combine fought against not only Earth's armies but also the entities that came from Zen. They held their own and accepted the surrender of humanity after Wallace Breen offered it. Their introduction to humanity showed just how powerful they were, but it was not just their brute force that made us fear them. When Dr. Gordon Freeman returned 20 years later, he and the player saw just how much the world and the people in it had changed. Remnants and echoes remained of the old world, a foundation on which the Combine had crafted their own dystopian settlements. To explore and understand what exactly had happened to the human mind over the last 2 decades, let's talk about this guy, Abraham Maslow. Back in 1943, American psychologist Abraham Maslow presented his concept of the hierarchy of needs in a paper called A Theory of Human Motivation. This theory outlined the 5 levels of human needs in order of priority. In a pyramid style, the base needs were presented at the bottom as a foundation for the next level. He believed that one could not attain the next level if their base needs had not been fulfilled, and this went up to the top of achieving one's full potential. Only through the fulfillment of one tier could a human then look at and focus on the next tier in the hierarchy. The bottom and foundation of this hierarchy are physiological needs. These are the bare essentials we need to survive: food, water, and shelter. The next tier focuses on safety and security needs, these being personal safety, security, health, and general well-being. The third tier focuses on love and belongingness needs, emotional relationships, friendships, romantic attachments, and a sense of belonging. I promise there's a point to all of this, just stick with me. Tier 4 focuses on esteem needs, to have self-esteem and to be viewed by others through a hobby, some recognition, a sense of collaboration, work, and general value. Finally, at the top of the hierarchy is Tier 5, self-actualization. For someone to realize their own potential, to accomplish something, to be the best you can be. Abraham Maslow emphasized that the higher needs only became important to an individual once they had satisfied and fulfilled the needs in the lower tier. So, what would happen if these needs, even on the foundation physiological tier such as food, water, and shelter, were taken away, then distributed and weaponized by an alien presence? The systematic dismantlement of each human need led to the total subjugation and psychological breakdown of the majority of humanity. If these basic needs were not met, the citizens would not be able to focus on the higher level psychological and self-fulfillment needs. Effectively, this kept them in a state of dependency. The Combine exploited the very needs that made the population human and used it to transform them into mere cogs in the Universal Army. There were some who evaded this completely through their affiliation with the Resistance, but sadly, before the arrival of Gordon Freeman, the majority were molded into a society of fear and paranoia. Some even became willing collaborators in this torment. Tier by tier in this hierarchy, we can see how this happened. When the dust settled after they arrived, everything changed. A huge chunk of the human population had been wiped out in the war, but there were some who still hoped that this threat would not be as dire as depicted in science fiction novels and digital media. To the Combine, however, life on this planet was just another resource they could exploit, another cog in their machine, or unit in their army. At the base of Maslow's pyramid, Tier 1, the very foundation, are our physiological needs: food, water, shelter. Without these, Maslow claimed we are not motivated to fulfill any needs above this level. So, where better for the Combine to begin transforming the minds of humanity? Over the initial weeks to years of occupation, the human and Vortigaunt population were moved across the globe into specially constructed settlements. Within these, they were monitored extensively and controlled. The Combine suppressed as much information as they could, but for those who resided within City 17, they knew at least of the existence of City 8, City 11, City 12, City 13, City 15, City 16, City 24, and City 27. The one we know the most about is City 17, located in Eastern Europe. Under the control of the Combine-chosen Earth Administrator, Dr. Wallace Breen, these citizens were assigned homes, given ration packs through dispensers, and water through vending machines. They were told that the land outside of these cities was hostile, a wasteland of aggressive creatures that had also come to Earth during the portal storms. Within the walls of the city, they were safe, thanks to the Combine. Through the lens of Maslow's hierarchy, the Combine had set up a system in which they provided humanity's base needs in this first tier, but exploited it for their benefit. Food was supplied through ration packs. The citizens claimed that the rations tasted awful. An egg-flavored gelatin calorie paste and water-flavored desiccated sustenance bars did not sound appealing at all. They were designed to be mass-produced, long-lasting, and offered the bare minimum caloric intake of those who consumed them. To get these rations, the citizens had to line up and wait for them from a dispenser. This mode of distribution suggests that Combine forces checked every person who came up for food to see if they had already taken a ration pack that day, or if they were wanted for an offense. Only through compliance and obedience could someone eat in a heavily controlled and monitored environment. Hydration was supplied through Breen's private reserve vending machines. The water came in limited sizes, and after drinking it, some civilians claimed it made them hazy and forgetful. This triggered others to think that maybe a chemical was put into the water. This makes sense. If the vast population forgot why they hated the Combine so much, they would be so much easier to control. As for shelter, well, this was supplied through assigned living quarters. The Combine knew exactly where each civilian was and who they were with. The Combine had taken each physiological need and adapted them to make the population reliant on them. If a civilian did not behave, did not follow orders, or resisted, their base needs could be taken away in a second. To survive, they had to comply. Breathing also obviously counts as a base need for survival, and while the air exchange was not implemented in the retail Half-Life 2, it was a feature in the beta. In essence, the air exchange was a cut factory that siphoned Earth's air through a portal and replaced it with toxic gas. This forced the population to wear gas masks to breathe, something Combine forces would have monitored and controlled. Not completely relevant to the retail game, but still interesting to note. The weaponization of this first tier of food, water, and shelter forced the vast population into a state of dependency on their benefactors, their providers. Without these, it would have been very difficult for an individual to think of anything other than their immediate needs. Rebellion was not an option unless someone was very strong-willed or exploited a loophole in a very well-crafted system. Now, in this scenario, just imagine you have been on basic rations for years. You are hungry, scared, paranoid about everyone around you, and then you are offered the opportunity for something better. Additional rations, better accommodation, non-mechanical reproductive stimulation, more freedom, and a bit of power. There are so many other factors that I will explore later in the video as we explore the high-level needs too. By volunteering as a member of the Combine's human police force, a collaborator in the civil protection, life could be better. To make your life just a little bit easier by keeping the rest of your fellow humans in line under the rules of the Combine regime. There have also been whispers and rumors of an underground resistance who work in the shadows to escape City 17. The Combine do not want this. Well, in a recent poll, I asked you guys what you would do. As of writing, there have been around 4,000 votes. The results were interesting. 38% said that they would join the civil protection, 46% said that they would not join, and 16% said other. Now, the comments which align with other kind of fall into three statements. Join the civil protection as a spy to help the resistance like Barney did. Attempt to escape City 17 altogether and survive in the wasteland. And then take a different way out. I thought the join the civil protection percentage would be a lot lower, but when it comes to such a pressured, desperate, and hopeless environment, those natural survival instincts would kick in, I guess. To protect your family or have a little power after everything has been stripped away would be enticing to some. The question did spark interesting debates in that thread. We are all products of our environment and the media we consume. The civil protection was not the only job available by the Combine. We at least know of the workers who dealt with the Xenian infestation in the quarantine zone, so we know that there were at least positions available that made the world safer too. The promise of the bare essentials was absolutely used to exploit the desperation of some of the citizens into compliance and collaboration, a very powerful recruitment tool, a way to snuff out thoughts of resistance, and a way to break down the population. Total control. Already broken down to be dependent on the Combine for their very basic needs, we move on to the next tier in the hierarchy and how they exploited it. Tier 2 focuses on safety and security needs. These consist of health, employment, property, family, and social stability. For health, we do not see any form of medical care supplied by Earth's benefactors, but we only saw a small section of City 17 during Gordon and Alex's journey. The Combine did provide medical supplies in the form of medkits to their soldiers. We could speculate that they also offered something similar to injured civilians. Employment came in the form of a role as a collaborator in the Combine regime. We already talked about the civil protection and other jobs they would have provided. For those who joined, employment at least satisfied a need in an oppressive society and rewards came from it. Better housing, food, social status, at least when in uniform, as the civil protection units were anonymous. As a collaborator, these units or employees would have felt more secure in a harsh environment. Some social connections could have been made and kept with family in return for loyalty. The Combine had many settlements across the wasteland, and in order to sever relationships, destroy the possibility of resistance group formations, and to generally disorient the citizens, people were sent off to different cities to live randomly. A bond lasted only as long as the Combine wanted it to, unless a civilian pledged loyalty. In a settlement under extensive surveillance from the patrols of the civil protection, city scanners and cameras everywhere, every action of a civilian was monitored, studied, and reported if questionable. In a climate of paranoia, survival would have been more important than personal freedom. No one could truly know what another person was thinking or where their allegiance fell. Was your neighbor a member of a secret resistance or a unit of the civil protection? Citizens were encouraged to report suspicious activity to the Combine in return for a reward. The risk to encourage others to rebel or inquire about resistance was by nature a risk to personal safety and security. Anyone could be desperate enough to use information like this to benefit their own lives. But what were the punishments for non-compliance? Those accused of collaboration with a resistance group were used to show the rest of the population what happened if the status quo was challenged. Civil protection raids of suspects were loud, combative, and performative as they were brought in for questioning. Some were lined up and searched, and there were even open executions. For those questioned and in some cases tortured for information, if they had any, they were either released and they could tell their tale of their harrowing experience to those who asked, further encouraging obedience in return for safety. For those, however, who were deemed anti-citizens, people who acted against the regime were sent to Nova Prospekt, one of the known locations in which the inhumane, barbaric Stalker transformation procedure was conducted. I say this every time I talk about the Stalker, but this truly is a fate worse than death, mentally and physically conditioned into a living machine. The vast population also knew what happened at Nova Prospekt, and in turn amplified that feeling of fear, paranoia, and that need to feel safe through obedience. Personal safety and security was given to those who earned it. The surveillance and threat of violence, or worse, was also there in their minds. As for those in the civil protection and other jobs, they were more secure. Their needs were met, but in return for their collaboration. For some, this distribution of the essentials of food, water, shelter, purpose, and safety could have led them to feel like they owed the Combine a debt of gratitude. The civil protection was just the first rank in a scale of Combine units in the Overwatch. This level did not require physical or biological modification, but the others did. The more severe, the higher the rank. If that feeling of debt was strong enough, would this push someone to go all the way? Across the cities, the civil protection provided a sense of order and normality. Law enforcement, just like in the days before the Combine's arrival, this was just a slightly different regime. They restricted, controlled, and monitored the movement of the population through checkpoints and barriers. This only added to the psychological impact. Movement between the zones of City 17 was controlled and linked to safety. Using the manipulation of safety in the control of movement was pretty smart. 5 years before Gordon Freeman returned, even the Resistance, through all of their resources and connections, had no idea an entire zone of City 17 had been quarantined due to a Xenian infestation. Under the guidance of humanity's benefactors, there was safety, and under this regime, information was distributed to only those who needed it. Everything was monitored, everything was controlled. Alongside this, as the movement of the citizens was controlled, it reduced the chance of organized resistance meetups. With complete control of what information was accessible to each zone and city on Earth, the Combine spread their own disinformation and propaganda through physical and digital media. Information that preyed on the already weak minds that had been broken down. Throughout the streets, posters such as Report the Vought and Combine for Safety were just two of many messages intended to divide a possible human and Vortigaunt alliance. The Combine themselves also wanted to enslave every Vortigaunt they found to turn them into living batteries. Combine for Safety is as simple as it looks. Through collaboration and compliance would those safety needs be met. These posters aimed to make the Combine regime normal. The most impressive tool was that of Breencasts, pre-recorded and live scripted messages recorded by Earth Administrator Dr. Wallace Breen himself, a human who spoke to the other humans about the benefits and rewards of unification. These broadcasts were displayed on every screen in every city, and he spoke in a calm and almost paternal tone to convey he cared truly about his kind. What is interesting about this is that the restricted movement and destruction of close bonds meant that no relationship could last long term. The longest relationship with another human was with Dr. Breen, a man who spoke to each person with a familiar, caring tone on a frequent basis. His overall messages was that the Combine were humanity's benefactors and protectors. They had come to Earth to help. The Combine had given them food and shelter after all, and even given them the opportunity of purpose. Within Breen's Breencasts, he spread manipulated information and censored those who offered a different narrative. He molded already weak minds into collaborators. Each Breencast was dedicated to a specific topic or story. In one of them, for example, he spoke about how he had been called a collaborator, a term that was intended to be shameful, but he did not see it that way. He saw the refusal to collaborate as a refusal to grow up.
Did the lungfish refuse to breathe air? It did not. It crept forth boldly while its brethren remained in the blackest ocean abyss, with lidless eyes forever staring at the dark, ignorant and doomed despite their eternal vigilance. Would we model ourselves on the trilobite? Are all the accomplishments of humanity fated to be nothing more than a layer of broken plastic shards, thinly strewn across a fossil bed, sandwiched between the Burgess Shale and an eon's worth of mud? In order to be true to our nature and our destiny, we must aspire to greater things. We have outgrown our cradle. It is futile to cry for mother's milk when our true sustenance awaits us among the stars. And only the universal union that small minds call the Combine can carry us there. Therefore I say yes, I am a collaborator. We must all collaborate, willingly, eagerly, if we expect to reap the benefits of unification. And reap we shall.
Gordon Freeman only heard a few of these messages when he returned, but imagine if several of these played every hour, every day. Constant reinforcement of the new normal, the new way to think. In his short time back, Gordon earned the reputation of the one free man and the opener of the way, a symbol of freedom and hope. This message was a threat to everything the Combine had done so far. When Breen discovered Freeman's return, these Breencasts were the perfect tool to relay a warning to the mass population. Breen openly called Gordon a disruptor who had acquired an almost messianic reputation, a figure synonymous with the darkest urges of instinct, ignorance, and decay. This man could undo everything they, as a species, had worked towards over the past 2 decades if he were allowed to continue free. Breen asked that if any citizen did see the so-called free man, they should report him. Civic deeds did not go unrewarded. Complicity with his cause, however, would be punished. Censorship and information campaigns were incredibly powerful tools in the Combine's arsenal. They crafted their own narrative in a society completely reliant on the information they provided. Open discussions about safety, threats, resistance, and security would not have happened, as anyone could turn in another human for a reward. And once again, this fear, this paranoia heavily reduced the opportunity for resistance. It was known that there was a resistance, but to discuss it and explore the possibility of joining was a dangerous thing to do. On a separate note, as we are talking about safety and security needs, I do have to mention the hostile and imposing Combine constructions. The city in itself is an aggressive and intimidating character, and designed purposely by the Combine. It does enhance those feelings of insecurity and discomfort. The weaponization of the safety and security needs of health, employment, property, family, and social stability actively ensured the population was always on edge and fearful of what would happen if they did or thought anything that did not align with the Combine regime. A heightened, constant state of paranoia, fear, and awareness that would have interrupted their daily lives and forced them to focus on their immediate survival. This ensured compliance and strategically stifled any aspirations towards higher psychological needs. These tactics from the Combine were essential in the maintenance of their control and the foundation of their power within the minds of every citizen in their settlements. On the other side of this, for those who gave in and joined the civil protection for that extra safety and power over others, how would it have felt to have that bit of control? To some, the simple act of ordering a stranger to pick up that can from the floor of a train station would have looked like a simple display of power, when in reality, it would have felt like true power in a hopeless world. For the person given the order, they would have likely been terrified and obeyed straight away. For the masses, this tactical suppression kept individuals focused on immediate survival rather than future resistance or personal growth. Having looked at how the Combine deconstructed and exploited the physiological, safety, and security needs of humanity, we look to the next tier in Maslow's hierarchy of needs: love and belonging. Friendship, intimacy, family, and love. In the Combine's regime, however, so far, there was only isolation and division. As a society, we inherently need friendships, family, intimacy, and a sense of connection. The first two tiers had already made everyone dependent on the Combine, and in a society where no one could be trusted due to the fear of betrayal, any bond could easily be broken. This was strategically implemented to ensure loyalty to the Combine, and to destroy any thoughts of rebellion or of joining a secret resistance that had managed to evade the Universal Union's awful tactics. Speaking of, in the background, the Resistance's bases were self-sufficient with their own food, shelter, safety, and security, free from surveillance and paranoia. They worked together as a group towards the single goal of removing the Combine from Earth. This was the complete opposite of the methods employed by the Combine. Although small, they and their ideas were a threat. They had freedom, physically and mentally. The transformation of people into individuals instead of families, friends, and relationships through paranoia, indoctrination through broadcasts and propaganda, and restricted communication not through force but by fear and self-censorship, disrupted the formation of networks and social bonds. The Combine's exploitation and destruction of the first two tiers would have directly impacted humanity's natural need to be truthfully social and form connections. Without a supportive network, who could anyone trust? If a civilian did manage to create a true bond, there was always the chance of relocation and that bond being severed forever. If a civilian were to speak about the chance of possibly attending a resistance meeting to escape this torment, could this information be trusted? Or was it a one-way trip to Nova Prospect? Nothing could be trusted. As an introvert myself, I do not need a lot of social interaction. My social battery dies so quickly when I leave my office, but as humans, we still need some social interaction and a sense of community. By preventing the formation of even the smallest bonds, the Combine further strengthened their position of power and complete control, physically and mentally. Without trust, how could new members join a resistance? I think the more interesting part of this tier is that of those who joined the civil protection and hid what their role was when they were not in uniform. How did they react when around closer bonds and smaller communities that did inevitably form? Forced to choose between turning in one of their own if they did or said something against the regime, or keeping something to themselves to protect them, which was risky. The Combine had given them what they needed to survive, just above the bare essentials. Would they feel like they owed them more? Through the erosion of trust and exploitation of social dynamics, the Combine forced individuals into a society of avoidance and isolation in fear that any one of their bonds could betray them and turn them in for having a thought or a viewpoint that did not align with the new regime. no one could be trusted. All of this was amplified by constant surveillance, division, censorship, paranoia, and mistrust. The additional removal and transformation of cultural and communal locations also had a major impact on this. Nova Prospekt, once a human prison, was turned into a place of horror. The Overwatch Nexus building appeared to have once been either a political building or a museum, transformed into a sterile, Combine-used headquarters of some of the Combine human forces on the planet. Under this regime, those needs of friendship, intimacy, family, and love would have been incredibly difficult to retain. Just another part of the Combine's physiological and psychological assault on what it means to be and function as a human. As we head towards the higher end of the hierarchy, we reach Tier 4, Esteem. This level focuses on two key aspects: esteem for oneself in the form of dignity, achievement, mastery, and independence, and the desire for reputation or respect from others in the form of status and prestige. By the time the Combine addressed this tier, the isolation and exploitation of the previous tiers had already ensured that these psychological desires would not be at the top of anyone's list of needs. Still, the Combine systematically dismantled any remnants of esteem that remained. Through the introduction of forced clothing, identical blue boiler suits, and standardized hairstyles, the Combine stripped citizens of their personal style and individuality. Men were required to wear short haircuts, while women were given simple tied-back styles. These measures erased any outward expression of identity. If a civilian were relocated to a new city, they would blend in seamlessly, indistinguishable from the population around them. Without the ability to appear visually as a separate person, or to voice different opinions or viewpoints, citizens were robbed of the opportunity for achievements or autonomy. There could be no power, self-worth, or dignity. Any attempt to stand out or challenge the regime resulted in swift and severe punishment. The Breencasts further amplified this suppression. Wallace Breen's paternal voice echoed through the cities, reinforcing a singular message: citizens should see themselves as a part of the greater structure set up by the Combine. Thinking or acting for oneself was unnecessary. Only through obedience could humanity evolve. To willingly become a collaborator, a cog in the machine, was to reap the benefits of unification. Under the Combine's rule, self-esteem, self-respect, and personal growth were deemed irrelevant. What mattered was the collective, and what citizens were told was important: obedience and servitude. Self-reliance or rebellion was portrayed as selfish, acting against the so-called greater good. The Combine, as benefactors, knew what was best for humanity's well-being. Why challenge the status quo? Why question their superiors when they had already provided food, safety, and shelter? Systems were in place to ensure compliance. Civilians were conditioned to act in alignment with the Combine's vision. Why enter a zone they were not authorized to visit? Why allow a family member or friend to criticize their benefactors when a simple report could silence them in exchange for a reward? The Combine deliberately destabilized the concepts of autonomy and relationships. The only relationship a civilian needed was with their benefactors. Self-esteem and respect for others were irrelevant under this regime. Additionally, through censorship and disinformation, citizens were stripped of confidence in their own judgment, agency, and decision-making skills. This forced them into an even deeper dependency on the Combine systems, and for those who dared to think or act differently, a civil protection unit was always nearby to ensure conformity. With the successful deconstruction of esteem, both for oneself and others, the Combine undermined individual achievement, suppressed expression and creativity, and forced an already oppressed population into a more uniform and controlled way of thinking. Fear, obey; paranoia, stay alive; conform. Every human knew that, to their benefactors, each life was expendable. Finally, at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of human needs is Tier 5, self-actualization. This represents personal growth, the realization of potential, and true self-fulfillment. For many, it is the pinnacle of existence where creativity, independence, and the pursuit of meaning come together. Yet, under the Combine's regime, this was a level of need that the majority of humanity would never even dream of reaching. Through their systematic dismantling of every need in the 4 tiers below, the Combine had ensured that the population remained trapped in survival mode. With their physiological needs exploited, their safety threatened, their relationships severed, and their esteem stripped away, how could anyone aspire to self-actualization? This is why, when Gordon Freeman returned 20 years after the initial invasion, humanity stood broken, compliant, and desperate. Citizens lined up obediently for their rations, walked the streets in paranoia, and avoided groups for fear of being labeled a rebel. Even the smallest spark of creativity, individuality, or intellectual curiosity had been snuffed out. They had been reduced to shadows of their former selves, mechanized cogs in the Combine's grand machine. For those who had joined the Civil Protection or rose higher within the ranks of the Overwatch, life may have seemed marginally easier, but unless their ultimate goal was the enforcement of oppression itself, beating down fellow humans on behalf of their alien overlords, they too were denied true autonomy, personal growth, or fulfillment. Their sense of purpose was dictated entirely by the Combine. Even they were little more than tools. One of the Combine's most devastating methods of control was the activation of a suppression field. This technology brought humanity's birth rate to 0. It stopped pregnancy. In an instant, humanity's ability to reproduce was stripped away. The last generation of humans on Earth had already been born. Through Braincast's, Wallace framed this horrifying act as a gift. He declared that humanity should thank their benefactors for removing their ability to reproduce. Procreation was no longer a purpose. We should look to the stars and transform under the guidance of the Combine. He promised that the suppression field would be lifted only when humanity no longer needed it, a goal as vague as it was unattainable under the Combine's reign. This loss of reproductive ability was not only a means of population control, but also a profound psychological blow. It fostered an environment of submission and futility, stripping humanity of any hope for the future. Without another generation to leave anything to, the concept of personal fulfillment became meaningless. Why strive for self-actualization when there was no legacy to pass on? Perhaps this hopelessness explains why so many humans voluntarily chose to undergo the biological procedures that transformed them into Overwatch soldiers. Some may have genuinely believed in the Combine's mission. Others may have simply given in, resigned to their fate as tools of an unstoppable regime. To the Combine, only the present mattered. The suppression of self-actualization ensured that the human population remained docile. After 2 decades of relentless conditioning, compliance had become the norm. Any deviation from the established rules was met with swift and severe punishment. For most, the pursuit of personal growth or independence was not only impossible, it was unthinkable. This is why, when Gordon Freeman returned, Breen and the Combine were genuinely terrified and desperate to hunt him down. Upon the arrival of the Combine, they systematically targeted each level of the human need in order to mold them into compliant, subservient cogs. By keeping them focused on basic survival and the suppression of their higher needs, they hoped to keep them docile, dependent, and unlikely to rebel. Every aspect of this universal union's occupation was thought out and distributed to the masses to break them down. When Gordon Freeman returned, he truly became the one free man and showed the masses through his actions that there could be a better life, a life in which they could fight for themselves and for freedom. He showed that even if they were in a hopeless situation, they could still rebel, and they did. With the help of a resistance scattered across many regions of the wasteland who had escaped the mental conditioning of the Combine, the Freeman's actions led to the fall of Nova Prospekt, a Combine stronghold. This was enough for those who were desperate enough for change to fight, to take back the city. The Combine were not indestructible, and they could be fought. And so, years of brainwashing and manipulation slowly began to fade away as the resistance rose. There were still civil protection and higher units who stayed loyal, but they were long lost at that point anyway. Years of conditioning had brought them to this point. As for the future, after the fall of the Citadel and closure of the Super Portal, it would be interesting to see just how much of that conditioning remained. 20 years of manipulation is not something that would be forgotten overnight. In this video, we explore the lore and story behind Jeff. We all know the story of the invasion of Earth. The Combine Empire conquered the planet in a mere 7 hours and spent the subsequent decade keeping humanity in line through many barbaric acts. The Combine were a mighty and powerful force, and with their power and aim to control the human population, they constructed settlements across the planet to keep a close eye on them and break them down. While the development and construction of these settlements did allow the Combine the ability to monitor humanity, these enclosed regions also offered them another advantage. The portal storms that had allowed the Combine to conquer the planet also brought through other creatures from other planets. Each of these creatures also wanted to claim Earth for themselves, and some were very territorial. So the settlements protected humanity and the Combine units from the wasteland, as the many deadly creatures between the settlement claimed it for themselves. Although the Combine were a strong force, they too struggled to contain Zen's population. Antlions dug deep underground and built nests. They also ventured into regions off-limits to them. To counter this, thumpers were installed that agitated their sensitive ability to detect vibrations, and headcrabs were noted to find themselves in the settlements in the search of a humanoid host to control. Overall, the Combine did a good job to keep these hostiles out through the use of their armed guards and technology. Within the settlements, the human population lived in fear by design to keep them compliant. They were monitored constantly, their food was restricted, and raids of their homes offered severe punishment if they were found in possession of contraband. A resistance did form in these early years, but if these thoughts of an uprising or action to rebel were discovered by the Combine, they were given the most inhumane punishment. A trip to Nova Prospekt and turned into a stalker to work as a mindless machine for their oppressors. On the other hand, the Combine offered their newly conquered population a way to live a more comfortable life, a way to join the human arm of the Combine Empire in return for better housing, treatment, privileges, and additional food rations. The most documented position available was a place in the Combine's police force, the Civil Protection. There were, however, many other positions that the Combine hoped to fill in order for their settlements to run smoothly without issue. Within Eastern Europe, in the settlement of City 17, the Combine encountered a problem. They had attempted to control the spread of Xenian flora and fauna, but even their best efforts had failed. An entire region of City 17 slowly fell to an outbreak of alien origin, filled with dangerous and unpredictable plant life and hostile creatures. The Combine decided to seal off this section of the city in order to protect themselves and the rest of City 17. In order to deal with this problem in the quarantine zone and similar issues across the wasteland, the Combine offered a new role to those who would accept it, the role of a hazmat worker as a member of Infestation Control to remove and incinerate all traces of the Xenian infestation to stop the spread. Around 15 years after the Combine's arrival on Earth, through choice or punishment, several hazmat workers were sent out into the quarantine zone to clear out a distillery that had become home to a new Xenian infestation. Unknown to them, they would never return home. As the workers arrived at the Golden Line distillery, the hazmat workers installed quarantine force field checkpoints, prepared a cleanup solution, and began their work. They believed that these force fields would stop the spread of the Xenian vegetation, but they were so wrong. Within the tight hallways, Xen coffers launched out fungal spores out into the air in order to spread further into the region. Xen snappers bit at anything that came close to them. Barnacles latched onto the ceilings and waited for their next meal, and bulbous pustules leaked onto the ground. This was not the plant life humanity had on Earth. This was aggressive, and it wanted to feed and spread. This region alone was dangerous. The spores alone, when inhaled, allowed the spread and growth of seedlings. To protect themselves from this, their hazard suits had an air filtration system with an independent air supply. This should have been enough to protect them from these dangers, or so they thought. During their time here, something went very wrong. A hazmat worker's suit could have been penetrated by a snapper, or even a headcrab in the vicinity could have attacked them. Regardless of how it happened, one of these workers was infected by the fungal spore of a Xen coffer. Inside of him, the parasitic seedling began to grow. Some time later, the awful aftermath of this deadly infection was discovered by a human scavenger called Larry. The Xenian infestation had spread across into the entire distillery. The force fields had not stopped the spread, and only one of the hazmat workers stood. But he was different. From above, Larry observed this worker, and he called him Jeff. As of now, his real name is unknown. From observation, it appears that everything went wrong just after the parasitic infection entered Jeff's system. As it began to adapt his physiology, Jeff would have noticed this instantly. His body had become host to new life that did not care about what happened to him. His body became bloated and swollen as additional skin grew and absorbed his hazmat suit. His new and old skin hardened and formed a natural protective barrier. His right arm bloated into a battering ram, and Xen coffers grew out of his back. Jeff's co-workers would have of course noticed these changes. However, by the time Larry discovered Jeff, he saw just how aggressive he had become. It is very likely that as each of the hazmat workers discovered the changes that had happened to Jeff, he reacted with rage and took them out, their bodies scattered all across the distillery. What Jeff had encountered so far would have been terrifying, yet the pain and torture was not over. This parasitic infection still had changes to make to his body. The worst part about this infection occurred on Jeff's head. Through what can only be described as the worst pain imaginable, Jeff's head split into two separate pieces, and in between them formed a mouth with rows of teeth. Inside of this mouth, another mouth formed with another row of teeth. He had essentially become the human equivalent of a Venus flytrap. His new head also resembled the snappers that lined the walls of this graveyard. From this concept art, it is very likely that Jeff was completely aware of what had happened to him, and he was still conscious. but he was no longer in control. The fungal infection was. All he could do was call for help, just like the human hosts that had fallen victim to a headcrab, aware of their situation, unable to do anything about it. All alone, the infection continued to take hold of Jeff as he was used to spread the Xenian infestation. As he wandered the Golden Lion distillery, his spores spread out into the environment. The quarantine force fields were designed to stop the spread. Jeff, however, still had his keycard on his body that allowed him to wander throughout the region without issue. Although he was in an incredible amount of pain, the changes that the infection had done to his body also left him almost invulnerable to any damage. The pain also kept him in a constant agitated and alert state. His co-workers were dead, but he was not alone. Barnacles formed on the ceiling, and headcrabs occasionally entered this bleak region. Despite this apparent danger, these were not an issue for him. The mutilation of his head had left him blind, but his hearing had improved exponentially, and even the slightest noise allowed him to pinpoint the location of any intruder in his new home. To protect himself and claim his territory, the fungus evolved its host and gave Jeff the ability to create a dark, toxic substance to launch at any who encountered him. He had become a mobile seed spreader, unable to control his own actions. This poor hazmat worker had just wanted to have an easier life on a Combine-occupied Earth, but fate had given him an existence worse than death. Within the distillery, Larry watched Jeff from above and observed his actions and reaction to the smallest noise. Jeff was in pain and lashed out at anything that came close to him. It was clear that Jeff was a human that had fallen victim to an infection. All Larry had to do was stay quiet in order not to startle this victim of circumstance. Although Larry was very careful to avoid the attention of Jeff, he failed to notice the tongue of a barnacle. To his luck, a young Alex Vance arrived in the distillery just in time on her way to the vault. In the distance, she heard the rambles of Larry as he contemplated how to get out of this situation. With her great aim, Alex shot the barnacle and released the scavenger, and in return, he offered her everything he knew about Jeff. In essence, he warned her that Jeff had excellent hearing and would rip her apart if he caught her. As she reached the ground floor of the distillery, Alex avoided anything that would make a noise, and she also covered her mouth to avoid the inhalation of spores and the chance that they too would turn her into a new host. Alex had encountered many zombies on her journey through the quarantine zone, but Jeff was different. He was in a lot of pain, but she had to pass him to continue on with her journey. A journey to aid the resistance and strengthen their forces. To navigate the Xenian-infested hallways, Alex made use of the breakable objects in this enclosed region. This had once been a distillery and had tons of bottles of vodka scattered around. The perfect object to launch into another area to distract Jeff. With each smash, Jeff exploded with rage and explored the area for his prey as Alex worked her way further in. Eventually, Alex successfully reached the exit of the distillery and discovered a walk-in trash compactor. With this, she had an idea of how to remove the threat of Jeff. Once again, she led Jeff through the distillery and into the trash compactor, and here she had a difficult choice to make. This game of cat and mouse had been one of the most stressful and scary experiences Alex had ever faced, but it was not Jeff's fault. He was also a victim. She could either leave him to live out the rest of his days in the trash compactor, or activate the machine and put him out of his misery. Regardless of the choice she made, Alex ventured on towards the vault and left her nightmare encounter in the Golden Line Distillery behind her. This encounter, and generally just the existence of Jeff, opens up the terrifying thought that more of humanity may have fallen victim to this parasitic fungal infection. An infection that transformed a human into a monster, a living human Venus flytrap. Always angry, always agitated. The Stalkers have often been cited as the worst thing that could happen to a human. Yet, at least they were conditioned to accept their situation, unaware of what they once were. Jeff and anyone else that fell victim to this same infection were aware of what had happened to them, always in pain, truly living a nightmare. Jeff, or whatever his real name was, is just another one of the many victims of the Combine Empire. Although indirect, they put him in the situation he was in. This truly was a fate worse than death. Here we explore in the lore behind the tragic town of Ravenholm. Believed to have been located within Eastern Europe, the town of Ravenholm was constructed, established on top of a source of natural minerals in the ground. This town became known across the region as a mining town, where the residents within could predominantly make their living working in the mines to acquire the natural formations within. As the population increased, so did the growth of the town, where more buildings were constructed along the coast to house the new residents. With a church on the outskirts, the religious folk here had a place to feel closer to their god. The many streets housed many stores so that the population had a place to spend their money, and communal spaces allowed the residents to feel closer as a community by spending time with their neighbors. As time went on, this simple mining town made its way in the world. Not a lot is known about the day-to-day functioning of Ravenholm before the invasion, but what is known is that this simple town would gather a reputation in the future. Unfortunately, not a positive one. On an unknown date during the early 2000s, planet Earth suffered a great catastrophe, the Resonance Cascade. Over in the New Mexico desert, the scientists of the top-secret Black Mesa research facility had managed to accidentally rip a hole in space during an experiment. With this tear, planet Earth became linked to another dimension, the border world of Zen. Over the following hours, this disaster triggered portal storms to ravage the planet, bringing through hostile alien life forms from Zen. As humanity began to understand their situation, they fought back these invaders, but the creatures kept coming. As the population of Earth collectively fought off these Zenian creatures, their defensive resources slowly depleted. Although the personnel of Black Mesa later managed to reverse the resonance cascade, and therefore breaking the connection between Earth and Zen, the damage had already been done. Jumping from universe to universe, the vast Combine Empire searched each one for sentient life so that they could firstly take all of the natural resources from the planet, and secondly, harvest the genetics and manipulate the physiology of these poor life forms into new soldiers for their armies. Although humanity had survived the Zenian attempt to occupy the planet, the resonance cascade had alerted the Combine of humanity's existence, and with this, another war began. As the Combine attacked the planet, Earth attempted to fight off these invaders, but already tired from fending off the Zenian forces in combination with the Combine's immense army and advanced technology, humanity surrendered merely 7 hours later to the Combine Empire. As the Combine traversed the planet, they rounded up humanity like cattle into Combine-controlled settlements.
Even though humanity had attempted to take out the Xenian creatures during the Xenian invasion, many of the creatures still remained and had now made this place their home. Despite the Combine having issues with the roaming headcrabs, antlions, barnacles, and various other Xenian creatures, these hostile lifeforms did come in useful. For the humans that still openly disobeyed the orders of the Combine, and in turn attempted to live in the wasteland, the Xenian creatures made survival difficult for humanity, and so the Combine-controlled settlements appeared to be the only safe haven from the creatures. Within Ravenholm, the survivors of both the Xenian and Combine invasion also evacuated to their local Combine settlement, City 17, where they would gain sanctuary from the dangerous creatures of the wasteland in return for their servitude to the Combine. With the Combine now in full control of the planet and its population, the mining town of Ravenholm lay empty. As the years passed, humanity began to form a resistance against their oppressors. On the outskirts of City 17, a resistance base, Black Mesa East, was constructed within the canals. From this base, Dr. Eli Vance led the resistance with the help of other bases scattered across the wasteland. Within City 17, Dr. Isaac Kleiner also constructed a base just under the noses of the Combine. Between these two bases, they created the Underground Railroad, a secret group of smaller resistance bases scattered around the wasteland that allowed the refugees escaping City 17 to find a safe haven from their oppressors. As more refugees came to Black Mesa East through the Underground Railroad, the base slowly became overoccupied, and so the resistance needed to expand to house their new members. To their luck, the resistance discovered a location just close enough that they could occupy just under the noses of the Combine. The local abandoned mining town of Ravenholm had everything the resistance needed: a place for the resistance population to grow and thrive, a place to acquire natural resources for their strategic missions against the Combine from the mines. And with its location being close to City 17, as well as being on the coastline, the resistance could navigate the wasteland covertly. With an underground tunnel connecting the mining town to Black Mesa East, the population could move between the locations with ease. Over time, Ravenholm became a major stronghold for the resistance. Those that wanted to reside in peace and fight for the cause now had a comfortable, safe place to live. With a stunning church on the outskirts of the town, the resistance were lucky to bring Father Grigori into their ranks. He could lead his flock through these tough times and offer comfort when they fell to the Combine strikes out in the wasteland. The resistance occupation of Ravenholm offered them safety and a place to grow, live, and plan out their future strikes against the Combine, but only if they could evade the watchful eye of their oppressors. As time went on, the population of Ravenholm thrived, that was, until the Combine became aware of their presence. Since their occupation of planet Earth, the Combine had been exploring the biology and technology that planet Earth had to offer, and after the failed Xenian invasion, planet Earth was now home to the headcrab species. Although humanity feared and loathed these creatures, the Combine saw the biological benefits that they possessed. Collecting the roaming headcrabs of planet Earth, the Combine came up with the idea to place them in large shells. With these shells, they could then fire them into locations across the wasteland. Although the standard headcrab would be worrying in one sense, the Combine also placed the fast and poison variants of the species into the shells, allowing ultimate destruction to the population they would hit. On a standard day in a Combine-controlled planet Earth, the Combine struck. From the sky, the town became victim to the many headcrab shells that had been launched here. As the headcrabs each left their temporary home, they wandered the town, attacking anything within reach. For the many who had chosen to live here, in peace away from the warfare of the Combine, they panicked and fell prey to the headcrab infestation. One by one, the headcrabs latched on to their new hosts, creating more danger for those around them as they became zombies. With this collapse of their society, those with the ability to defend themselves watched in horror as their friends and family fell around them. The priest watched as his congregation fell, and the resistant stronghold of Ravenholm slowly changed from a place of peace and hope into a dark place of horror. After becoming aware of this brutal strike on Ravenholm, the resistance members of Black Mesa East decided to close down the tunnel connecting the base to the town. For additional protection, they even set up barricades and a sentry gun to keep the base clear from the increasing zombie population growing in Ravenholm. As the Combine had only been aware of Ravenholm and not Black Mesa East, the future of the Resistance's cause came with making tough decisions, and so, leaving the poor people of Ravenholm to their fate without a way to escape meant that the rest of the Resistance within Black Mesa East could continue to fight in secret. As time passed, the abandoned residents of this old mining town fell one by one to the headcrab and zombie infestation. The mines below became a hotspot for headcrab activity, while the town became flooded by zombies, headcrabs, and the many bodies that had perished during the attack. Having taken out this once strong resistance town without having even stepped foot inside of its walls, the Combine then moved on, believing their mission to have been successful. As many of the population died, some attempted to escape the town, but there was one that chose to stay. Having been abandoned by the Resistance and having watched his congregation die to the brutal headcrab species, Father Gregory decided to stay within Ravenholm with a mission to save the souls of those he had once known. Although the headcrab, upon latching onto their prey, did turn their hosts into killing machines, the victims were still believed to be conscious, just not in control of their motor functions. In a state of agonizing pain, the victims would scream out for help, but due to the headcrab's control of their cognitive functions, these pleas would come out backwards and appear to those around them as a moan. Navigating Ravenholm through the rooftops and using his rifle to defend himself, Father Gregory continued with his mission to save the souls of those he had once considered friends by putting them out of their misery. It is also thought at this point he even attempted to free his friends from the grasp of the headcrab, but each of these attempts ended in the death of the headcrab and the host. With a lack of ammunition in the abandoned town, Gregory had to get creative with how to take on the mass amount of zombies throughout the streets, and so he made use of the town's natural resources to create defenses and traps. Recycling the furniture that had once been used to make this town a home, Gregory stacked them up against one another to create makeshift barricades to slow down the zombies wandering the town. With them now having limited access to certain areas of Ravenholm, the Mad Priest then strategically placed propane barrels within the many streets and buildings. Although these barrels alone were harmless, a bullet from Gregory's rifle, Annabelle, could set them alight, resulting in a giant explosion, taking out everything around them. Alongside these barrels, Gregory used his creativity to set up traps. Salvaging parts from the now unusable vehicles, he constructed a trap that would drop a car with force to the ground upon activation of a lever. With this force, anything below it would be crushed, and after its drop, the car would simply rise back up, ready to fall again onto another horde of zombies. With the various sections of Ravenholm separated by metal fences and scaffolding, Grigori made use of this. Manipulating the power structure of Ravenholm, the priest turned these metal regions into open conductors for the electrical current, which, when touched by the zombies, would fry them, ultimately killing them. For his third trap, Grigori hooked up large propane tanks to hoses. With these hoses, he created holes that allowed the gas to escape. After this, he placed a live electric feed within the area with a button to activate a spark, and so, when the spark hit the gas, the region would fill with flames. Although the zombies could continue to hunt down their prey when on fire, this trap also had the additional benefit of slowing them down as the flames further decomposed their bodies. For Grigori's final trap, he took out the engines from the vehicles he had previously used for his crush traps. Using these engines as power sources, he attached blades to them, which would then spin at an incredible speed, slicing through anything they interacted with. As time passed, Grigori lived in solitude, simply attempting to help the souls of those he had once considered friends move on from the hellish existence under the control of the headcrab. For each killing of a zombie, another one of his congregation was free. Ravenholm had once been a place full of hope, and it had fallen so far to a place of death and misery, where no one would choose to visit willingly unless they were extremely desperate. Now approximately 20 years after the initial Combine invasion, the world had moved on and most of humanity had either accepted their fate under the servitude of the Combine or had joined the Resistance in an attempt to remove them from the planet. On a standard day, the tunnel from Black Mesa East to Ravenholm opened once more, only for a few seconds, where one of the living would attempt to pass through Ravenholm on their path to do their part for the Resistance. With the many dead bodies of refugees scattered throughout the streets that had fallen to the initial Ravenholm headcrab bombardment, hanged corpses and vicious traps that had killed many of these creatures, Dr. Gordon Freeman discovered a dangerous and broken town that had once been a stronghold for the Resistance. All he needed to do was get through this place alive. To his luck, a now mad Father Grigori discovers Gordon and sees him as another life to save. Having been alone for all of this time in this desolate town, Grigori's mental state had taken quite the hit, and it seemed that another living person's appearance had at least brought him back. With the limited ammunition around the town, Gordon relies on Grigori's traps to avoid the constant zombie and headcrab bombardment. With the mines of Ravenholm being the perfect place to escape the town and move on with his journey, Grigori takes it upon himself to guide the scientists there to safety, and for a short time, Gordon and the priest fight together, freeing the tortured Resistance members from the control of the headcrabs. Finally making it to the graveyard, the duo fight off a horde of zombies that had made their home here. This place had once been a sanctuary to mourn the lost Resistance members, and now it had become yet another place tainted by the Xenian and Combine forces. Successfully making it through the graveyard, Grigori bids farewell to Gordon as he travels into the dangerous, headcrab-infested mines below. As Gordon leaves, Grigori continues his grand fight to save the souls of his congregation. The tragic mining town of Ravenholm had once been a place of hope for the refugees and Resistance members of humanity, but the Combine did what they do best. They conquered and destroyed so that they could grow stronger and dominate those below them. It is unknown what became of Ravenholm, its tormented streets, and its lone survivor. After the fall of the Citadel and the destruction of City 17, it is likely that Ravenholm also fell in this explosion, where the tortured souls can now finally be free from the control of the headcrabs. But if it did not fall, then Father Grigori still has some work to do.
In this video, we explore the lore, story, and methods of teleportation in Half-Life and Portal. Far beyond our reach, in a universe sealed away from our own, the Combine crafted their homeworld. From there, this interdimensional war machine set its sights on distant worlds and civilizations to invade. Their aim was simple: to conquer and enslave all sentient life in the multiverse. But how had they begun this journey? Well, their origins are still shrouded in mystery. But at one point during their rise, the greatest minds of this empire explored dark energy, a hidden pressure that drives galaxies apart. Though it has never been seen, its presence is felt in the accelerating expansion of the cosmos. Human scientists believe it makes up nearly 70% of our universe. Anyway, the Combine either mastered it themselves or encountered a species who had, and absorbed this knowledge to use in their war efforts. With their advanced technologies, the Combine harnessed this invisible pressure and bent it to power their machines and weaponry. It was with this energy source that they constructed dark energy reactors, giant, powerful cores that powered the most energy-consuming pieces of machinery. Across their overworld, citadels stretched into the sky where the Combine prepared invasions, dissected life forms extracted from conquered worlds, and twisted every discovery into a weapon or tool for their ever-growing army. These citadels, at least from what we know, were capable of generating tunnels into other universes to invade and conquer. Powered by dark energy, these portals were built on two scientific frameworks: string theory and quantum entanglement. According to string theory, the universe is not built from tiny points of matter, but from tiny vibrating strings of energy. To exist, these strings require hidden dimensions curled up beyond our sight. Within these folds lie coordinates, a kind of cosmic map. By seizing these coordinates through methods unknown to us, the Combine could force distant places to align. When the geometry matched, a portal tore open. But alignment alone was not enough. To bind those distant points together, the Combine turned to quantum entanglement. In quantum mechanics, particles can be paired in such a way that their states remain linked, no matter how far apart they are. Measure one and the other responds instantly. The Combine scaled this principle far beyond particles, applying it to entire locations. Once entangled, these points acted as a single passage, open one like a door and the other followed. With string theory providing the coordinates and entanglement forging the bond, the Combine tore into new universes. This process required an enormous amount of energy, and while it was effective for tunneling into new universes, it carried a critical limitation. Well, one in particular for their ultimate goal. It only worked between universes. The Combine could not teleport to another point within the same universe, and instead had to rely on localized transportation. Even with this limitation, the technology remained one of their most powerful tools. In the distant future, the Combine faced rebellion on one of their conquered worlds, Earth. At the top of the Citadel in City 17, Dr. Gordon Freeman destabilized the dark energy core after striking it with dark energy. Cut off from their overworld and aware of the cataclysm this would cause, they ordered the core of the structure to explode. The idea behind it being that the surge of dark energy would form and feed a super portal, set to restore a connection between Earth and the Combine homeworld. Unfortunately for them, the Resistance intervened. They launched a rocket carrying a beacon that triggered a burst of energy which disrupted the process and caused the forming super portal to dissipate.
It was in 1944 that Cave Johnson purchased an old salt mine in Upper Michigan where he found his first taste of success. From his original company, Aperture Fixtures, came a new venture in 1947, Aperture Science, his attempt to move beyond manufacturing and into scientific innovation. When he won an award for Best New Science Company from the Science and Business Institute of America, Cave's ambition only grew. He wanted Aperture to be the best in the field, no matter the cost, and by 1950, he had turned his attention to one of the most dangerous and ambitious pursuits imaginable: teleportation technology. The first version of the Aperture Science portable quantum tunneling device was bulky and crude. Strapped to the operator with a heavy harness and fitted with a hose-like appendage, it carried the power to fire 2 portals. Aperture have never revealed how this early version of the device worked. If they did, Black Mesa would have probably stolen it like they stole everything else, but from the name of it, we can theorize. Quantum tunneling is the phenomenon where a particle can pass through a barrier that should be impossible to cross under normal physics. Aperture's device built on this idea, creating a macroscopic tunnel in space itself. In other words, not just at the scale of particles, but large enough for a person to step through. The quantum reflected its basis in quantum physics, while the tunneling referred to forcing a passage through space-time, connecting 2 separate locations instantly. The tunnel produced by this first version of the device were dangerously unstable. Test subjects often suffered mutilation and, in many cases, death. It was not the first time Aperture's experiments ended this way. Many astronauts, Olympians, and war heroes had met tragic ends. This was just one cause of these disappearances. It was in 1956 that Aperture Science gained a large cash infusion after signing a deal with the United States military. With this funding, they pushed further into the development of their portal device. 2 problems held them back. The machine was bulky, and keeping the portals open for any length of time proved nearly impossible. After a series of lawsuits over the disappearance of so many test subjects, Cave Johnson was forced to change how he ran his company, but it did not stop his dream of being the first to perfect portal technology. That dream only grew stronger when he learned that Black Mesa had entered the race, a government-funded corporation he despised with every fiber of his being. With the little he had left, against the wishes of his financial advisors, Cave ordered the purchase of nearly $70 million worth of moon rocks, desperate to find a material he could use or test to give him some sort of scientific breakthrough. And this material did. When ground up, it was the perfect conductor for portals. To bring Aperture back to its former glory, in around 1976, Cave announced a 3-tier plan: the Heimlich countermaneuver, the Take-A-Wish Foundation, and most importantly, the Portal Project. Cave later died from moonrock poisoning, but the project continued without him. As research advanced, the device grew smaller and the enrichment center was constructed to test it. By 1998, during an internal marketing campaign, Aperture unveiled the new Aperture Science handheld portal device. The ASHPD used a miniature black hole as its core, suspended in place by what Aperture called the Ring Singularity Harness. Left on its own, the Singularity would have consumed both the operator and the surrounding environment, so it required constant control. To stabilize it, a small battery-powered fan kept the core cool. If that fan ever failed, the device became too dangerous to operate. The upper and lower ring singularity rings worked with the harness to shape the singularity's energy into a controlled field around the core. Without it, the device produced nothing but unstable voids and failures. With it, Aperture created the framework needed to project a traversable event horizon onto a surface, a doorway that allowed instant passage between 2 points.
The next component was the portal intake manifold, which carried the shaped field from the core to the front of the device. From there, 3 quantum shaping prongs phased and focused the energy, forcing it into the oval ring that appeared on a surface. The prongs were essential. Without them, the field would have scattered into useless static, but with them, the portal locked onto the surface and held its oval shape. To prevent confusion between linked portals, Aperture added dye reservoirs. Selecting blue or orange tapped the chosen reservoir and stained the projected fields. The color had no effect on the physics, but it gave the operator a quick way to identify which aperture was linked to which. Once a second portal was fired, the 2 colored rings became quantum linked, forcing them to act as a single passage. Anything entering one aperture emerged instantly from the other with its mass, speed, and direction preserved relative to the new location. In essence, speedy thing goes in, speedy thing goes out. If the device failed to create portals, the cause was usually a stalled singularity. Aperture's solution was to trigger the core with a sudden energy pulse, often by throwing a German stick grenade directly into it. The blast could restart the black hole and restore function, but the method was dangerous, unreliable, and typical of Aperture's approach to research. The Aperture Science handheld portal device was one of the greatest breakthroughs the company ever produced. It was the kind of technology the Combine would have seized and weaponized without hesitation. But after the rise of GLaDOS and the fall of Aperture, the facility was locked down. Nothing could get in or out. Even after the Combine invasion of Earth, they attempted to breach it, but every effort ended in failure. While Aperture Science experimented with black holes in the pursuit of teleportation, over in the New Mexico desert during the 1980s, a small science team at the Black Mesa Research Facility made an extraordinary discovery. Government funding gave Black Mesa the freedom to explore countless fields of research. One team, working out of Section A in the prototype labs of A-17, succeeded in building a functional teleporter, but it did not send them to another location on Earth. Instead, it opened a path to another dimension entirely: Zen. In time, survey teams were dispatched to explore this strange world. They discovered it was a board world, a crossroads that connected to other dimensions and universes as it passed them. It was a place filled with flora and fauna that had crossed over long ago and never left. It is unclear how the team were able to connect to the border world in the first place. However, there are theories that the G-Man and his employers had a hand in it, considering what happened later. What is certain is that once the connection was made, entire sectors of Black Mesa were transformed. Laboratories were built to study the specimens brought back, and the link to Zen was never lost. In those early experiments, teleportation required a focal point on the border world. Every attempt led them to Zen, and only from there did they hope to use their research to uncover access to other dimensions, universes, and worlds. With such a promising line of research, Black Mesa set its sights higher. Sector F became home to the Lambda Complex, where Black Mesa raised a teleporter vast enough to push their experiments further than ever before. During their expeditions into the border world, the team noticed and recovered strange crystal samples. Upon study of these, did they find that they contained something extraordinary: exotic matter. Having been part of the original teleportation experiments, Dr. Rosenberg oversaw the design of the anti-mass spectrometer in Sector C, inside Test Lab C-33A. This machine bombarded those crystal samples with oscillating electromagnetic fields and high-energy plasma. The process revealed displacement fields within the crystals and allowed sensors to study their properties. So, what was the purpose of studying these crystals and the strange properties they contained? Black Mesa believed the exotic energy locked inside them could provide the power needed to open and stabilize wormholes. For their teleportation framework, they turned to the Calabi-Yau model from string theory. They believed the universe was not limited to the familiar 3 dimensions and time, but also contained additional dimensions curled up beyond sight. These curled spaces, called Calabi manifolds, were like stops on a vast transit system running beneath reality. The team theorized that if the exotic energy within the crystals could be harnessed, whether it was negative mass or some other unknown force, it might allow travel between universes through these wormholes, but their map of the Calabi manifolds was incomplete. Imagine riding the Black Mesa transit system, trying to reach a specific sector. Each manifold should have acted like a station along the line, carrying you from one universe to the next. The track should have run straight from one station to another, yet in practice, the only working line always passed through a single junction. No matter what destination they chose, the tram stopped there first. That junction was Zen. The border world acted as the only stable anchor in the hidden geometry of space, forcing every teleport to route through it. Black Mesa hoped to master direct travel, but the universe itself only gave them one track to ride. This was why Black Mesa tested crystal after crystal in Sector C, searching for the one resonance that might finally carry them past Zen and into the wider multiverse, and crystal sample GG-3883 was very promising. This was not their only line of study, however. Across the floating landscape of Zen, survey teams discovered orb-based teleporters. The green portals appear to have been created by the Zenian population, while the purple belonged to what is now known as Race X. But not all teleportation on Zen was tied to these orbs. The Nihilanth appeared capable of moving its armies across dimensions by its own power, while the Vortigauns, with the aid of antlion extract, could not only teleport but also manipulate time itself. Inside the Lambda reactor core, the team appeared to have reverse engineered the green portals. These specifically allowed localized teleportation to other spots in the sector. Some of the scientists also managed to harness these green orbs into a weaponized form. The displacer cannon was fitted with 2 triggers, each generating a displacement field around the user or their target, but it always sent whoever was caught in the field to the border world. Despite all of their hard work, the study of that crystal sample, GG-3883, combined with the reduced safety parameters on the anti-mass spectrometer, triggered the resonance cascade. When the resonance cascade exposed Earth, the Combine detected its presence. They powered up their dark energy reactors and sent a vast army to claim yet another world. Humanity submitted in just 7 hours. Over the subsequent decades of occupation, the Combine did what they always did. They took knowledge, resources, and transformed some of the population into weapons. In the shadows, however, formed a resistance, one led by several survivors of the Black Mesa incident. Dr. Isaac Kleiner and Dr. Eli Vance each established secret bases within Sector 17 on Earth. Kleiner worked from the heart of City 17 itself, hidden beneath the Combine shadow, while Vance operated from the canals. Alongside their resistance and their scientific efforts to one day free Earth from occupation, they searched for a way to move themselves and refugees safely between these bases without Combine detection. As their team expanded, Dr. Judith Mossman joined their efforts, but how exactly did their teleporters function? Vance and Kleiner had both been members of the Sector C Anomalous Materials team.
The scientists who had used the anti-mass spectrometer to probe Xenian crystal samples. When Black Mesa collapsed, they had managed to escape with some equipment and several crystals. In the decades that followed, they refined their work, building on Black Mesa's Colubi-Yao framework. The Resistance's teleportation still relied on Zen, but there was no way around that. The border world remained the relay that made any connection possible, yet through years of work, Dr. Kleiner achieved a breakthrough. He discovered a way to treat Zen not as a destination, but as an unexpressed axis in higher dimensional space. Instead of entering Zen directly, the Resistance could use it like a dimensional slingshot. Their teleporter bent its path around the border world, swung through that hidden axis, and then reconnected to local space, all without ever passing through Zen itself. Because of this, they no longer needed a focus device anchored in Zen. Kleiner and his team built a modulator that reproduced the effect, stabilizing the jump entirely from Earth. Despite a mishap with Lamar, the Resistance has succeeded in creating a localized teleporter. This breakthrough not only gave the Resistance a safe way to move between their hidden bases, it was later scaled down for smaller applications. At White Forest, the same technology appeared to have been used to teleport Magnuson devices directly into holders so that Freeman could use them to defend the base. It was almost poetic. A teleportation experiment gone wrong had led to the fall of Earth, and here, at White Forest, it had saved them. Before the formation of the Super Portal, before the fall of City 17, and even before the return of Gordon Freeman, the Combine tried to claim localized teleportation for themselves. Through their informant, Judith Mossman, they gathered enough intelligence to build a prototype teleporter inside Nova Prospect. On the surface, the teleporter seemed to work. In reality, it was dangerously unstable. Powered by dark energy, it relied on a pulse-forming network that took far too long to recharge. If it was used twice in close succession, the risk of total failure was certain, and with dark energy involved, failure meant the destruction of the entire structure. Judith believed that the flaw came from the Combine's failure to account for dark energy in their equations in their rush to construct it. Their portals were string-based, built on the same Colubi-Yao model once used at Black Mesa, but without the Resistance's refinement of the slingshot method that bent paths around Zen. The Combine's design was crude and unstable. During the Resistance raid on Nova Prospect, the prototype teleporter exploded the moment Gordon and Alex teleported. This explosion revealed an unusual phenomenon: the slow teleport loop. Their journey did not happen in the instant they experienced. It stretched across an entire week. For them, only seconds passed. For everyone else, 7 days. I have theories on how this phenomenon connects to stasis, but I will save that for another video. Teleportation was always a double-edged sword. Across every universe and faction who pursued it, the promise was the same: discovery, power, and freedom. Yet, more often than not, it ended in ruin. The Combine's mastery of dark energy brought conquest, Aperture's obsession with progress collapsed into tragedy, and Black Mesa's experiments triggered the resonance cascade that doomed Earth. Beyond what is known, Aperture held secrets that many dismissed as myth. One was the Borealis, a Healy-class icebreaker that vanished from its underground dock. Rumor claimed it was fitted with Aperture technology capable of slipping through both space and time. In another strand of reality, Aperture launched the Perpetual Testing Initiative, where they mastered travel across the multiverse itself. They tunneled into alternate versions of our universe and stole from other branches of Aperture, exploiting their own counterparts to fuel endless experimentation.
Every universe and every faction sought to push further than the last, but in the pursuit of teleportation, the result was normally the same: ruin. Here, we explore what we know of the lore and story behind the Manhack Arcade in the Half-Life 2 beta. Almost every video that covers the Half-Life 2 beta, mine included, will always mention the vast shift in tone between the beta and the retail version. The words dark and gritty may come to mind. This version saw the brutality of the Combine and how they made use of and manipulated almost every aspect of the human body and mind to strengthen their hold over the population of the planet. Out in the cities across the wasteland, Combine soldiers followed the orders of the consul from his office in the Citadel. The most important of these orders were to keep control, put fear into the citizens of the various Combine-controlled cities, and most importantly, stop any resistance activity from occurring that could even spark the talk of a rebellion against their Combine overlords. Humanity had made a deal with the Combine at the end of the 7-hour war, submission in return for their lives, so the Combine had to keep them in line by any means. The civil protection units had many tools at their disposal to complete their jobs and keep the Combine happy. The most commonly used were stun batons to quickly take down a citizen if they disobeyed an order, and pistols were fired to wound them if they became aggressive. For the more dangerous and resistant of humanity and Vortigaunt, the civil protection had another weapon up their sleeve that everybody recognized and feared: the Manhack. The vast Combine Empire had conquered countless planets and with it, countless species during their exploration of space. For each race, they experimented with their biology to see how well they could fit into their armies and workforce. Aside from this, they also looked at what the occupants of a planet had discovered and invented over the ages. When they came upon humanity, they learned that they relied heavily on technology to construct their settlements, gather food, and the various essentials the human civilization needed to grow and thrive. With this technology, the Combine looked at what they could create from it to control the population. After years of occupation, the Combine developed many pieces of technology and techniques to keep humanity submissive. One of these came in the form of the Viscerator, also known as the Manhack by the Resistance. These terrifying flying shredders were mostly deployed by Combine civil protection soldiers and sent to seek out Resistance members, outliers, and generally anyone who opposed the Combine's rule. For the most part, they were extremely effective. Although the Combine had control over the majority of their cities, other factors still got in their way, such as Xenian lifeforms and well-defended Resistance regions. They would have normally sent in city scanners to survey and scout out these areas, but the large floating cameras had no way to defend themselves. To fix this, they instead sent in manhacks to take down what they could as the Combine watched from a safe location. Although the manhacks were extremely aggressive, they also often destroyed themselves in the process of an attack. These Viscerators were used for many situations by the civil protection. The main one was to injure their target for retrieval, and as they were deployed in waves, they often completed their task. They also came in extremely useful in a situation where their target had set up in an enclosed region, such as a cave or a tunnel, that were unsafe for the officers to enter. To combat this, they deployed multiple manhacks into them to force their target out. The manhacks were designed to fly at high speeds at their target as their 3 razor-sharp blades hacked anyone that was not fast or smart enough to escape. This earned them their name of Manhack. The Resistance soon came to learn when one of these had been deployed and how to fight against them. When deployed, they gave off a loud, sharp beeping noise that accompanied the sound of a motor that span its blades. These blades had the ability to cut through softer materials such as flesh, cardboard, and even wood with ease. However, they were not strong enough to slash through stronger materials like metals or concrete. Therefore, a shot from a bullet or a swipe from a metal object typically took them down fairly easy. On paper, it would appear that when a resistance fighter came up against a group of manhacks, it would have been easy to take them out, but their loud blades and speed in which they came at their target would urge panic in even the strongest person in that terrifying situation. The resistance hated the Manhack, and for those who survived the subsequent infections of these deep wounds, they bore deep scars to remind them of their encounter. The Combine had constructed a small but powerful weapon that allowed them to herd outliers like sheep, control the population, and injure them when they stepped out of line. With this, the bright and brutal minds of this multi-universal alien empire came up with another way to manipulate the masses and force submission, a way humanity had no idea they were about to participate in. The Combine knew humanity extremely well. This alien force, by nature, were a combination of species that had harvested and been harvested to become more efficient for their greater goal of domination. This meant that they knew how to experiment with, study, and manipulate the species they encountered. After the 7-hour war, the Combine allowed the human population to live out their days in their cities, under the constant surveillance of cameras and Combine units. The citizens lived mostly in fear, aware that almost all of their actions were watched by Big Brother. If they acted incorrectly, they were punished severely. The Combine knew how humanity felt and used this to their advantage. The citizens needed an escape, even if it was just a mental one. To this, the Combine constructed an arcade in City 17 for them to visit. As of now, only one arcade is known of, but there may have been more in the other cities across the wasteland. As an entertainment center in the city, bright light blasted into the sky, and the sound of laughter inside could be heard on the depressing streets. Inside, the walls and aisles were filled with arcade video game cabinets. It appeared that the name of the game they played was called Hackman. For the few hours the citizens spent here, they could forget about the troubles of the world. Even if they had to wait in a queue to play, it was still an escape. When it was eventually their turn, the citizens played a game in which they took control of and piloted a cartoony sprite of a manhack in a cartoon city just like their own. The players knew what a manhack was, as they frequently surveyed the cities and accompanied Combine civil protection units. The aim of Hackman was simple: clear the level of the human characters by killing them with the manhack. When they cleared an area, prompts appeared on their screen, one of which was, "Good work, you've cleared the sewers. Are you ready to level up?" These targets always appear to resemble enemies of the Combine, mostly resistance members, citizens who defied orders, and generally, others that sought to escape and rebel. The most rewarding part for the player was that they could hear the screams as their buzzsaws cut through their targets, and as a reward, they were offered upgrades and more dangerous versions of the manhack for their next level. By playing a game from the Combine's perspective, it reinforced the idea that the Combine were the good guys and those who stood against them were actually the antagonists. Rebellion was not acceptable and was punished harshly. This was propaganda disguised in the form of fun and escape from a harsh reality. Interestingly enough, no two-play sessions were ever the same. The antagonists were always portrayed by different refugees or resistance members, and the location of the game always changed each time they played. Behind the scenes, the players were just missing out on one crucial element of the arcade. The game they played was in all terms a game. It had been developed by Combine scientists and engineers. There were goals, upgrades, and rewards. However,
The players did not know that the city they explored and the Manhack they controlled were not virtual at all. It was merely a camera into their world adapted to look like sprites of a much older game, a real city, a real Manhack, and most importantly, real deaths of the citizens they hunted and took down under the orders of the Combine. The arcade, dubbed Manhack Arcade, gave the Combine the ability to subconsciously indoctrinate their citizens with their beliefs and allowed these miserable citizens to unknowingly participate in the murder of the rebels that plagued the city. They had tricked the population into becoming unwilling soldiers in a war against the bravest of their species. Under the Combine's grasp, the players were completely unaware and would only discover the truth if they were told. Of course, even after the discovery of the truth, some would refuse to play and attempt to spread word, while others would have just continued to play without regard of the moral consequences of their actions. It could be entirely possible that every Manhack that surveyed the dangerous regions of the wasteland and cities were controlled by someone who simply believed they were playing a game that had very real actions in a devastating world. The Combine had enforced many pieces of technology, control methods, and features across the planet to ensure they held on to Earth and kept humanity submissive. Aside from the disgusting physical mutilation of the species, the Manhack Arcade may be the worst. A brutal, psychological, and manipulative technique that, if the player ever discovered the truth, would ultimately break them. The Manhack Arcade was a barbaric torture method developed by the Combine to manipulate the citizens of the wasteland to capture and injure outliers for them. This was an incredibly smart idea on their part. If these players did eventually discover the part they had played in this awful practice, they would have to live with that guilt for the rest of their lives. Humanity never wanted this war, and when it did come, they agreed to the terms of the Combine in return for a life with limited torment as long as they obeyed. Unfortunately, the Manhack Arcade did not make it into the retail game, but we did still see other methods and tactics the Combine enforced to keep humanity subservient. No children, the threat of being turned into a stalker, and even the promise of a reward if they turned against their family and neighbors who had joined the resistance. Regardless of the methods they used, the Combine Empire understood humanity very well and knew how to motivate them, with or without a game that, at a first glance, felt like an escape. As of now, 3 main versions of the Manhack Arcade have been found, and they kind of show how the development of this location changed during production. I do not know a lot about game design, so this will not be as detailed as my regular lore content. Version 1 looks most like a normal arcade that you would find in your hometown or a holiday destination. This has 2 floors and a locker room. Of course, while the location was used to trick the citizens into that feeling of safety, the Combine still placed their propaganda on the walls and floors of the building. The ground floor is filled with regular arcade machines. There are so many machines here. These could have all been solely used to control the Manhacks, or my speculation is that there would have been many other games designed by the Combine to trick the players into helping them. Just imagine: Torture Simulator, Capture the Vortigaunt, Beating Quota, Hunt Down the Freeman. That's a good one. This is why I feel like it is a huge shame we lost this feature. It could have also been used in so many other ways. This is by far my favourite version of the Manhack Arcade. Lulled into a place of false escapism only to be a part of the torture and torment of another human. Version 2 is completely different to version 1. Valve took out everything and made it new. This is where we see the iconic concept art of the Manhack Arcade. The once almost welcoming 2-floor arcade has been turned into one large room.
The players now have limited machines and have to queue to play. It feels much more like a Combine creation. It makes sense really. If the citizens have to wait to play the game, they are likely going to enjoy it more and try harder to beat the scores of the other players. Classic Combine psychological manipulation. It feels almost like a well-oiled machine. In Arcade 04, we can see a larger room with stairwells with access to other regions. Version 3 of the Manhack Arcade has the same interior as version 2. This one just has a different exterior. Instead of a standard entrance on the street, the building was adapted to adorn a giant star. From this concept art, we can see how overpowering the citadel is in the background, as the entrance to the arcade sits just below it. It may also be important to note that the entrance seems to have been modelled after a Macy's entrance, or it at least was used as a reference. This version went through different changes, and eventually, the star was removed to suit a more Combine Half-Life 2 beta entrance. As I said earlier, the first version of the arcade is my favourite. In a way, it feels comforting. That may just be because when I was younger, my family used to travel to a holiday location that had an arcade that looked just like it. So how would Gordon Freeman have come across the Manhack Arcade on his journey? He would have met Barney Calhoun while he was inside, and Barney would have then sent him to a radio tower building, which would then have pointed him to the sewers where Dr. Kleiner's lab was hidden. The Manhack Arcade would have been a brief stopping point in the story, but although brief, it would have set the tone for the Combine and their ability to manipulate humanity. The concept for the Manhack Arcade sounds absolutely amazing. However, Valve stated in what has become my bible, Half-Life 2 Raising the Bar, that like many early gameplay ideas, it sounded good on paper, but proved to be overly complex and not very fun. From this quote, and other discoveries since, it suggests that the player could have played the game too. If not, it would still have been a great feature to have in the background. The Manhack is a pretty small but interesting topic. During the early stages of the development of Half-Life 2, Valve planned for the player to acquire the ability to reprogram Manhacks and then use them against the Combine. I feel like this would have been a great weapon to add to our toolset. I guess in a similar vein to how we used the bug bait to fight against the Combine in the retail version. Unfortunately, this feature did not make it into the game. Moving forward, during the development of Half-Life Alyx, it seemed Valve had not forgotten about this feature and once again attempted to implement it into the game and have Alyx reprogram the Manhack sent at her. Sadly, once again, it was cut. While the ability to reprogram and use the Manhacks were cut from the official Valve games, the fan game series, Entropy Zero, focused on the story of a Combine unit abandoned in City 10. Through him, we were able to use the Manhacks as a weapon against the Resistance. This is probably one of the best Half-Life fan games I have played, and the ability to use the Manhack is pretty impressive. I would highly recommend anyone to play it. All of them are free on Steam.